A pesar de los importantes avances de los últimos años en la mejora de la cobertura para el acceso seguro al agua potable y saneamiento, mayor eficiencia y aumento controlado del riego productivo y de agricultura familiar, y la mejora en la infraestructura de drenaje pluvial y de protección costera, aún persisten importantes brechas para alcanzar los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible relativos al agua en América Latina y el Caribe. Un estudio reciente de CAF, realizado en 13 países, concluye que es necesario invertir en promedio $36.000 millones por año hasta el 2030 para atender las necesidades de infraestructura para la seguridad hídrica. Este panorama presenta importantes desafíos en el financiamiento sectorial en un entorno de mayor presión fiscal en los países derivado de la pandemia COVID-19, que llama a la recuperación y reactivación económica y además a un crecimiento más inclusivo y con mayor resiliencia climática. En este contexto, los países de la región están llamados a aumentar las inversiones y mejorar la eficiencia en el gasto público, en el que el agua toma un rol preponderante para la consecución de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Esto requiere mecanismos innovadores de financiamiento, tanto público como privado, con alto valor agregado, incorporando además nuevas tecnologías y digitalización de procesos y soluciones más verdes. También es necesario establecer planificaciones de mediano y largo plazo que tracen una hoja de ruta priorizada de las inversiones bajo criterios específicos regidos por la inclusión y habilitación de infraestructura preparada para contrarrestar los efectos del cambio climático. CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe, con el apoyo del Ministerio para la Transición Ecológica y el Reto Demográfico y el Ministerio de Asuntos Económicos y Transformación Digital, presentan los novenos Diálogos del Agua España, América Latina y el Caribe, financiamiento para la reducción de brechas, espacio de diálogo en torno a los desafíos en el financiamiento de las inversiones necesarias para cumplir las metas establecidas en el ODS 6 y los ODS relativos al agua, y debatir sobre los nuevos instrumentos y esquemas de financiamiento para la seguridad hídrica, así como las barreras que limitan su diseminación y aplicación a mayor escala. CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe.
CAF, Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, sorry, everyone. The authorities and friends present in the headquarters of the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge of Spain. And good morning to those that are following us by streaming in Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Alejandra Macera, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of CAF, Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, to this 9th edition of the Water Dialogues between Spain and Latin America and the Caribbean. This event is part of a strategic platform for collaboration in the long term made by CAF or CAF and the Kingdom of Spain through the Ministries for the Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation. We'd also like to thank the support of our media partner, e-Water or e-Agua. Today we gather here to talk about the challenges in financing the necessary investments to meet the goals established in the Sustainable Development Goals related to access to water and sanitation. Before we start, I would like to let you know that we are streaming the event live through caf.com and iagua.es and the YouTube channel of the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. Besides, I'd like to encourage you to share your feedback on the event on the social media with the hashtag Diálogos del Agua, and I'd like you to encourage you to follow the accounts of Agenda CAF and iAgua. And without further ado, we have the pleasure of welcoming to this opening session of the Water Dialogues, Hugo Meran, Secretary of State of Environment by the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. Mr. Moran, you have the floor. Good morning, or good afternoon, dear representatives of the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, dear Secretary of State of the Ministry of Economy, dear Minister, dear Ambassador. Thank you very much to you all for participating in an event that it's going to be full of presentations and panels to promote the dialogue on water. This is the 9th edition of the Water Dialogues Latin America, as it was mentioned, where it is this ministry takes part and supports from its first edition already back in 2015. This is a participation and a partnership that at the same time represents a very important part of the collaboration agenda with Latin America. The discussion spaces at the highest level around the management of water resources resulting from the different dialogues have been an excellent opportunity to strengthen and add visibility to our partnerships with the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as our brother countries in the Latin American region. The growing collaboration between Spain and the CAF is translated into a close cooperation work focused on the knowledge share and the exchange of experiences in terms of managing resources or other more specific resources like water treatment, reuse of wastewaters, and the waters from reservoirs and dams. And this is how it's been reflected in each of the sessions of these dialogues. As I said, this partnership started back in 2015 through the signature of a first agreement between the two parties. That agreement was renewed in 2021 within the framework of the 7th edition of the dialogues. This is a partnership framework that is strengthened with a proposal for technical agreements and specific bilateral agreements that link the work with other regions of other countries of the region, like Argentina or Bolivia. And this occasion, with the 9th edition that we now starting, will aim to establish a dialogue around the challenges related to the financing of the necessary investments to meet the goals established in the Sustainable Development Goals related to water, particularly, as it was mentioned, in SDG number 6. Currently, in Latin America and the Caribbean, 161 million people, which represents 24% of the 24.6% of the population, still lives without access to safe water handled in a safe way and sufficient manner and handled in the right way. Plus, 431 inhabitants of the region still don't have access to safe sanitation, with over 66% of the wastewaters returning to the environment and the water bodies that are untreated. In light of these figures, there's no doubt that the countries must increase their investments and improve their efficiency and related to public expenditure, which requires innovative mechanisms related to financing, both public financing and private financing, with a high aggregated value, as well as the incorporation of new technologies and digitization of processes, as well as greener solutions. Likewise, we also need medium and long-term planning. We need to have a roadmap that prioritizes investments under specific criteria managed or ruled by the enabling of repair infrastructures in order to counteract the effects of climate change. It is important to highlight that funding is one of the 5 cross-sectional accelerators that are independent of the SDG number 6. And in order to meet these goals, it is important to we need an investment that is 3 to 4 times higher than the current levels. This is a challenge much higher than the financing capacity of any institution, and that is why it demands financial innovation. Back to regional cooperation between Spain and Latin America, the regional space that is the object of this collaboration reaches its maximum expression in the Conference of Ibero-American Directors of Water, which is a thematic network of the General Secretary of Ibero-America, where Spain has positioned in the recent years as an enabler of a higher regional integration in Latin America because it is hosting its permanent technical secretariat. This CODIA is a privileged space between the water authorities of the Ibero-American region and the institutions and organizations that are more relevant, and that includes the CAF. This pace has also resulted in water being one of the key components in the construction of the Ibero-American Environmental Agenda, which is promoted by the Forum of Ministers of Environment. I would like to also highlight the recent first Latin American Water Forum, which was held recently in Brazil, whose objective was to strengthen the dialogue and the integration of decision-making processes and governance related to water and sanitation in the area of Latin American countries and the Caribbean, and the political and institutional context. Also, the idea is to set out networks contributing to sustainable development of the region. I'm already concluding, but I would before like to highlight the commitment of CAF with the water security in the region, which is reflected in the water strategy by CAF 2023-2026, which establishes the action lines for water security, whose strategic objectives are the integrated management of water resources for controlling floods, droughts, and improving the water governance, and also safe and inclusive access and equal access and efficient access to water and sanitation. Also, the reduction of the pollution of water and urban waste waters, and also the improvement of resilient family farming. From the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, we value and we celebrate this commitment and this effort. We are sure that this will result in very good outcomes. We need solutions for these commitments. We also expect to maintain this fruitful collaboration with the CAF, and we hope to continue celebrating joint events like this one, which undoubtedly will contribute to taking the steps forward to reducing the gaps that still persist in the region related to water. And in order to conclude, I'd like to thank you all for your participation, your active participation in this call, and also like to thank you for your contributions. I am sure that they will contribute to building a better governance space and to improve the expectations from now to the future. Thank you very much and enjoy your afternoon.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your words, dear Secretary of State. And we now continue with these opening remarks, giving the floor to Christian Asinelli, Corporate Vice President of Strategic Programming in CAF. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those who are listening to us and following us from Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much, Secretary Mr. Hugo Moran, for your words and for your participation and your support throughout so many years to this proposal. Thank you also to Secretary Gonzalo Garcia Andres, whom I've also had the opportunity to work with in a lot of topics related not just to water issues, but also with relation to the constant dialogue between CAF and the government of Spain. So thank you also very much, dear Secretary of State. Also, Vice President of Barbados, Santiago Gracia, thank you very much for being with us. Your presence here, particularly on a very important day. Today we've held an extraordinary assembly within our institution in order to elect new members of the chairs of the directory, and they have been elected by the rest of the member countries, Barbados, the Republic of Barbados. So thank you very much and congratulations for the new challenges that Barbados is going to face, supporting all the other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in a space for regional integration, like CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you very much for being today with us today. It is for us, as always, a real pleasure to be here in this event. This event is an event prior to a very important international meetings in terms of environment, which is COP28. A lot of you present here will likely tomorrow or the day after be traveling to take part in this so important event. And we wanted this year to celebrate these water dialogues within the framework of the COP28, so that we could also contribute, like they say in our water team. We wanted to add our drop of water to improve the quality of life of people in Latin America and the Caribbean with regards to funding projects that are very important. Once again, thank you very much to the government of Spain. These 9 water dialogues, this activity has already become a mandatory appointment and a mandatory event with regards to the interaction between the stakeholders of this area, decision makers, policy makers, government departments, international organizations, civil society, etc., etc. And that is why I'd also like to particularly thank the General Director of Water, Teodoro Estela, with whom our also team works very closely. He has contributed also a lot to the work that we conduct here. Thank you also particularly to all the members of the panels that have come today and that are actually top-level panelists, government civil servants from Brazil, El Salvador, Barbados, and other countries. Also particular thanks to all the CAF team, because they make this possible every year. It's not just to the urban development and creative economies, our manager Ángel Cárdenas, Fran Rojas, Antonio Morales, who are probably around here. Also, thank you to the office here in Europe, our manager Ignacio Corlasol and all his team, Maria, Carla, Africa, I saw her too, Moraima. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but thank you everyone for the work that you do in order for us to be able to share this so important event with everyone. And it is the very first time that we do it here in the hall of the MITERD, the ministry. It is actually, I was just telling the secretary, I think it's a very, it's the right place from a symbolic point of view also to hold this kind of activities. So thank you again for the possibility of meeting in this special venue. I think that this platform for exchange is fundamental for the plans of Latin America and the Caribbean. We're all facing this climate challenge ahead of us. It is a historical moment as a society, as a generation, and we have to generate changes, not just in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in the world as a whole. And also Spain is leading or is helping us to lead these type of issues related to the management of the water resource. It is important because of the leadership that Spain has in these type of issues. And Spain being a member of CAF, and Spain having an important participation, not just from the point of view of financing, but also supporting all the countries of the region, but also Spain contributes with a lot of knowledge and expertise. Some of the presence here have also visited somewhere yesterday, and that is a reflection of how much we share experiences and knowledge. Spain is a reference country, as we know, in all sectorial issues, but particularly with everything that is related to the financial needs related to water in order to respond to the management of the water resources. And in previous years, in these same meetings, we have addressed different topics: financing of water infrastructures, financing of public policies so that the water policies can be sustainable, circular economy, water safety, and so on. But in this occasion, like the Secretary of State was saying, we have actually focused on the financing gaps for the water sector. The idea is to work in order to reduce those financial gaps that currently in the region are still very, very important. The Secretary of State was indicating some very important figures on the gaps that we have in terms of water. But it's not just water, it's also in terms of digitalization. There are over 170 people that still have no access to internet in our region. In terms of infrastructure, it's a bit similar. We need thousands of millions of dollars in order to meet the SDGs. That is why I think that the fact that we're here today, working together, holding these dialogues, discussing, thinking together how we can commit ourselves, in order to commit ourselves and in order to think how we can generate this necessary change. And I think it's important that we meet like we do today. And this study, the Secretary of State also mentioned it, the study on gaps and investment portfolio in water and resilience in Latin America, like you very well said, indicates a very shocking figure. Over $36 billion, will be necessary in the coming years from here until 2030 in order to meet the needs in our field, in this sector. Out of that, about $25 billion are only related to issues on water and sanitation. We still throw in a lot of our wastewaters in our water bodies. And that implies that we need to work very seriously on the plans and on the funding, because we cannot do it alone in our region. And with regards to water infrastructure, we're also facing very serious challenges with regards to the construction and the operations of the system. In terms of water management, we have challenges like funding, the inclusion of climate resilience mechanisms. We need water for farming, for the industry, other productive sectors that turn the challenge into a bigger challenge. We need to increase and promote investments, and that is why it is very important to hold these discussions, these fora, so that year on year we continue increasing the funding, so that we can become more and more efficient, so that we can relate and meet with the service providers. And like the Secretary said, we need to be innovative, not just with regards to technology, but also with regards to funding. From the beginning of the administration, from the President Díaz-Granados, already 2.5 years ago, our top management stated that we needed to work in order to become the green bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, the bank for economic growth, so, supporting sustainability and the project in an egalitarian fashion. Hence, our corporate strategy, what we've been developing until 2026, they have a lot of topics in their agendas, but one of the key topics has to do with working on water safety. You can see photos here on projects that we have developed in Galapagos, Panama, Argentina. The idea is to improve the quality, not just of the projects, but also the quality of the services performed by each of our countries, member countries. Last year, we presented in the water conference, the UN Water Conference, an action plan for water safety, which includes funding for up to $4 billion. We have the opportunity of being in such an important way, and that contributed to giving voice to the region of Latin America, the Caribbean. The idea was to promote the better management of water resources as an element to promote financial policies. This is all aligned with the 2030 development agenda to promote everything that's got to do with universal access to water, sustainable and integrated and holistic management of the water resources, always highlighting all the sustainable development goals, or particularly as part of this event, the SDG number 6. And just like a few minutes ago I mentioned when I started, we are in this is like the pre-summit of the COP28 in Dubai. That meeting will gather heads of states from over 40 countries, regional leaders, political representatives, members of the environmental activism, scientists, experts, and so on. And we're going to be there providing support, giving voice to Latin America and the Caribbean. For the first time, we're going to have a stand, and that will be called "We Are a Solution," Somos Solución. That's how we see ourselves from the Latin America and the Caribbean region. We can be a solution to the global challenges, and we will provide support to all our member countries in their activities, discussions, seminars, etc., in order to promote, in order to enhance the voice of our region, to position Latin America and the Caribbean in a very important global scenario like COP28. We hope it to become a discussion space where that results in positive results for everyone. I already mentioned Ángeles Cárdenas before. She'll be present there also. The Director of Environment, Alicia Montalvo, she is from Spain. We're also very proud of having her as part of our team, our CAF team. And together with the Vatican, we're also going to present a set of studies that we have developed, and we're going to launch a program with young people that we have called Laudato Si, in order to promote environmental activism amongst the young people in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our goals, like you all very well know, is to have sustainable progress, just progress. This has to do with the 3 transitions promoted by the government of Spain that we do support, and we have supported not that long ago in Santiago de Compostela, in the ECOFIN meeting with the ministers of Latin America and the Caribbean and the European Union. The ministers of the Treasury and Finance. This was a very important event led by Spain, which gathered all these representatives to discuss its issues. I think, from my point of view, from my humble point of view, had a very good outcome, very positive outcome, and Spain has contributed a lot to this positioning, has contributed to put our region in the geopolitical map, and that is very important for us to generate not just more investments, but better investments and quality investments. So our objective, as always, is to work for no one to be left behind. I am fully convinced that these type of events, the meeting that was held yesterday when you went to the field, the different policy makers that took part, the lunches, the meals, the chats, the events, even the coffee breaks where we can also interact with each other are absolutely crucial in order to generate that critical mass that will allow us to take a qualitative step to meet what we want to meet. The fact that this is the 9th edition means that the next one is the 10th edition. We will be celebrating our 10th anniversary. Like we say in our region, we're going to have the biggest party. And we will have to have a strong activity, not just to state the support of Spain, Latin America, and the Caribbean, but also to state how Latin America and the Caribbean is ready as a region to face the challenges that the entire generation present here today is going to face, in order to change their quality of life and in order to take a qualitative leap in this common house. The Pope Francisco says that Pope Francis says this is our common house, so we'll have to take care of it. So good luck, everyone. Thank you, everyone, and I wish you all a fruitful event. And I also hope that next year's event is also spectacular in order to celebrate this 10th anniversary of this strategic alliance that has so benefited Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you once again, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por...
Well, thank you very much for that very interesting address, Mr. Azzanelli. And now we are going to hear from Gonzalo Garcia Andres, Secretary of State of Economy and Support to Entrepreneurs in Spain. You have the floor, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Hugo, thank you very much for making us feel so very much at home. Different from Casa de America, but we adapt. Dear Christian, wonderful, as always, to be with all of your good selves here in Madrid again. I have to say that, yes, this is the 9th edition of the Diálogos, and it's been 9 years, which isn't that long, but if you think about what's happened over these past 9 years, the setting financial cooperation for development, well, I have to say that very much has happened. The objectives were approved in 2015, remember Paris, and who would have thought that we were going to see the living proof of the pandemic and everything that came after. which makes everything very complicated. We need to continue to advance in order to achieve the objectives set forth. So I think that the fact that we've survived, the fact that we're here together, the fact that we're talking again about the dialogues, looking forward to next year, the 10th, well, it's proof solid of our robust nature, and I think it's going to help us recover strength, because this is a very complex environment indeed. I have to say that anything we do with regards to public policies, with regards to international cooperation, cooperation for development, all of the actions undertaken over these past years, well, I have to say that the dialogues are a very telling token of cooperation. CAF and Spain, the ministry, and the ministry in Spain, the current minister, the former minister. We talk about the very same issues now as we talked about before, different callers, but it's much more ambitious, especially if you think about the efforts underway to ensure that this cooperation is even more ambitious. And I think it's fair to say that, yes, we've worked very hard, and I have to say that President Rivera, Vice President Calvino, I think that these are very telling results. This is what allows us now to successfully lead the attack on the challenges we face. So yes, there are, of course, gaps in funding. This is the activity that you've undertaken at CAF. We're talking about $36 billion every year. But I would like to give this conversation a different backdrop. The exchanges, today's dialogue, this is hard work. This is very hard work, because what we want to do is ensure that cooperation is even more ambitious, not only from the point of view of the relationship between Spain, Latin America, and the Caribbean, but also from the vantage point of the European Union. We, as you know, Spain currently presides the Council, and our mandate is to foster the depth and scope of economic and financial relations that bind the European Union and Latin America and the Caribbean. I think it's a must, actually, because the geopolitical reality right now is a very complex one indeed. So if we take a step back, if we lose strength, what we will see is that we splinter and we lose track of the objectives we have set forth, which are ambitious, of course, for the year 2030, which means that we need to do just the contrary. We need to leap forward, join forces, and leverage our knowledge, our experience, the contacts that we've been able to build together over these past years in order to really, really reach out towards the future. Let me begin by bringing to mind the status quo of the economic relations binding Spain and Latin America and the Caribbean. It's a healthy one. 2022 saw bilateral exchanges growing by 41%, and it's groundbreaking if you think about the diversification of the commercial exchanges which are taking place between Spain and the great sum total of economies of Latin America and the Caribbean. Spanish investments abroad, which in 21 amounted to nearly $500 billion, well nigh 50% of this direct investment is in Latin America and the Caribbean, which I think is proof of the fact that, yes, the Spanish private sector is defending a long-lasting investment relationship. In other words, a relationship that looks to the distant future with regards to Latin America and the Caribbean. And here we would be encompassing infrastructure and services, among others, and of course everything having to do with water. Now, Christian said something which was interesting. Of course, he talked about the summit, LAC EU, but the meeting which took place a couple of months back in Santiago, I have to say, I believe that was a landmark, and it was the result of hard work undertaken by CAF, hard work undertaken by the ministry in Spain. And the fact of the matter is that this was a fantastic result. And, you know, sometimes these things, well, what you want is to make sure that it's okay. Well, it was much more than okay. It was wonderful, and it's an outstanding example of the kind of political initiative and economic and financial relations that we need in view of the world we live in, a world where there were many ministers from Latin America and the Caribbean who talked about the challenges, and CAF actually prepared 3 reports, very valuable ones, very clear, reaching brilliant conclusions, talking about the challenges in the region and how we may tackle them within the scope of the relationship with the European Union, which tries to leverage the global gateway, that agenda of investments, that delving into that contribution thanks to investments to that transformation. So sustainability, ecological transition, the transformation of everything digital, and that social transformation, which needs to be complementary to the others. So within that framework, Spain signed the covenant for our contribution. In the previous instances, that would have been a sample of, yes, the fact that we put our money where our mouth is. In other words, the desire to take these political decisions. Well, now we're going to be adding millions of dollars to that capital increase. We do that, other institutions do that, but very decisively by Spain, the financing by CAF of projects that are geared to development in the region. And then there's the ICO. The amount is $300 million. And this in those countries where CAF actually has a presence. It's important, and actually we'll see this. It's not the amount. It's actually assessing the needs and looking for formulas. There's those multilateral instruments. You have cooperation, you have banks, and you have agencies, national, in order to generate resources. But at the same time, when we talk about investments, we can talk not only about the amount. It's true that interest rates now are higher than they were. There's less access to money. But I think that we need to understand clearly at this point in time, on the one hand, that investments are absolutely essential to achieve more efficiency, to achieve better levels of future welfare, but always the quality of the investment process is the key to success. So when you have problems that have to do with instability or with crisis, well, if we scratch the surface, we see that at the end of the day, it has to do with difficulties inherent to the investment process proper. But quantity does not generate investment. So the process is much more complicated. It is within an institutional framework. It is within the framework of rules and regulations, and it has to be a part of a framework where there is collaboration between the public sector, those investments that are paid for by the budget, public money, and then the private sector. And it's absolutely essential to talk about funding, and it's important to talk about rules and regulations, institutional frameworks, and PPP, public-private partnerships. These are elements that are essential because they feed off of each other. You need to be able to build projects, they need to be feasible, they need to be doable, they need to be achievable and within a specified period of time. That's important. And from the point of view of Spain and the European Union, at this point in time, we are currently immersed in that plan to recover and be resilient in order to recover from the pandemic. By the way, we've achieved that, fortunately, and especially foster an overhaul of the economy in order to determine more solid basis for increasing productivity and real wages and welfare. This is essential teachings. This is very important. We've just approved that plan for recovery purposes. This is the result of other resources which are available in Spain, over 10 billion euros in transfers, over 83 billion euros in loans. But because we are, those of us who are involved in the execution of the plan, we know not only do we need resources, we also need to design the projects, select, ensure that there's calls, ensures that there's bids, ensures that the system is in place so that investments, private investments, be in a position to take decisions in order to maximize impact. Because the ambition of SDG 6 and others will only be to be achieved if there are public monies available. This is a sine qua non, but it's not enough. We need to have clout. We need to be able to focus on innovation. We need to be proactive managers, and we need to get the entire private sector involved. Let me wrap up now by saying that, of course, apart from sharing with you my best wishes for this session's contributing to dialogue in the area of water, let me thank CAF, and let me say that I do acknowledge the role of President Diaz-Granados, Christian. I have to say that CAF and all of you who work in this field, I have to say that your work is tremendously valuable. It is going to allow us actually to achieve a new level in terms of focusing on our activities in order to achieve the objective which the government of Spain has set forth for itself. I think we all know that we're very much aware of the value of CAF in the region, the bank, if you will. We've achieved very much in a short period of time, and of course we are very keen to continue to work together and so progress and advance in such a way as to ensure that this dangerous world we live in allow us to be stronger and not actually be an obstacle in our activities which are geared to ensuring that we do achieve those very ambitious objectives. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por sus palabras, señor secretario de Estado.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Secretary of State. And now we are going to hear from Ángel Cárdenas, who is with CAF. He's in charge of urban development, water, and creative economies. Mr. Cárdenas is going to talk about gaps in water and resiliency in Latin America and the Caribbean between 2030 and 2040. Mr. Cárdenas, you have the floor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on whether you're here or with us via remote. Just last year, when we met for the 8th dialogue, we said that, being the last speaker is a challenge because the first speakers have brilliant ideas to share and they give the numbers for the first time. So I'm going to try to not repeat what anybody has said. And I'm going to begin by casting a video which I think explains what the product is. This is an analysis of gaps 2030, 2040, and this is the result of a study of different investment plans carried out in different countries. I think that one of the major challenges that is studied, no matter what the numbers is, the thing is that we're doing terribly as a region. It's going to be very difficult to close the gap. This is my takeaway for you this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. We definitely have got to get investments into the private and public parts, and not only in terms of quality of investment, quality. This is very important. So please, let's cast. Here we are.
Todos sabemos que un año tiene tres.
We all know that a year has 365 days. But did you know that 365 billions is the dollars necessary for Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of investments by 2030 in order to ensure that the population of the region has fair access to drinking water, sanitization, hygiene, and other challenges that have to do with guaranteeing irrigation in coastal areas, as set forth by the objectives, the SDG 6 and others. Thanks to the report Gap and Portfolio of Investments in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean towards 2030, CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe, was able to calculate the amount necessary that had to be invested to close the gap, $365 billion between 2021 and 2030. COVID-19, of course, was what accompanied us at the beginning of that decade. Now we would be talking about $55 per year per inhabitant for 10 years. This investment has to be broken down into 4 areas: water and sanitation, dredging, watering, irrigation and resilient agriculture, and management of coastal areas. But why invest? In our region, 1 of every 4 citizens does not have access to water. There is no water security. 16 million persons do not even have basic access to this absolutely essential liquid. And in the case of sanitation, things are worse. 51%, so about 336 million of Latin Americans and Caribbean citizens do not have access to secure and safe water. And nature also is hard hit by the gap, because 64% of wastewater in the region is not treated. It is not reused. This contaminates all bodies of water in the area. In the region, 32% of the current potential of irrigation is actually taken advantage of, whereas greater investments are necessary in our coastal areas in order to mitigate the damaging effects of rising seawater levels on populations and their drinking water. The level grows. The increase evolves from 2.5 to 3.5 millimeters per year. Visit www.sayoteca.caf.com and become familiar with our agenda. Learn more about the amounts needed to close the gap in the countries in our region, and learn about what CAF actually does to provide support to these countries as they advance towards achieving the goals. CAF aims at investing $4 billion. This is the amount that we want to raise between 23 and 26. This is going to focus on water security, and this is an increase of 67% of the average invested by this entity. Together, we work to ensure a better quality of life for millions of Latin Americans and Caribbeans, especially those who are most vulnerable. CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe. Well, this is incredible. I think that this is a very clear explanation. But my address has to do with our response, what the challenges are to close the gap. And let me just devote a couple of minutes to talking about that photograph. When we talked about dialogues 1 all the way to 9, our logo, our countries have evolved. We've grown slowly but surely, and today our DNA is Latin American and Caribbean. And hello to the Deputy Prime Minister who has been with us these days. Congratulations. Barbados is now a full-fledged member. And this is even more of a challenge because we understand that the situation, the crisis is what it is. It is a water crisis. There is not one part of that part of the world that is most at stake than the Caribbean. Look at the data and see how that variation has evolved over time. There's been different challenges, destruction, the need to rebuild infrastructure. This allows us to truly spotlight the Caribbean. That's why this slide is very important. It is much more than cold numbers. It's also understanding what the specificities are. And the report said so itself. The video said so itself. We need apparently 0.5 of GDP to guarantee that investment. But this is misleading if we think about how different each country is from the other. This need will actually represent up to 4 points of our GDP. These are impossible numbers in view of the fiscal constraints we're subject to. But if we now delve into the presentation, yesterday we went to Valencia. We met with EPSAT yesterday. The person in charge of water and the environment said something which is very true. She said, no water, no life. No life, no future. Now, I think it's absolutely true that when you analyze the SDGs and see how very important SDG 6 is, well, I think that that is when you understand that it is essential if we are to achieve the remaining goals. Anything that has to do with malnutrition, anything which has to do with adaptation to climate change, all of them, 11, 15, 13, all of them. But we see that all of the goals are very closely intertwined with the success achieved by SDG 6. So CAF, and Christian actually said so at the beginning of his presentation, really casts a spotlight on the strategy to guarantee water security. We need to rethink as a bank, we need to grow substantially, not only the volumes of investment, but the modalities of investment. In other words, not all countries have to receive the same treatment. No. We have the ambassador from Bolivia with us. We have Mi Riego programs, which are excellent. But if you actually analyze what happened, how a program of this nature was actually built, well, it's because we understood the specificities, social and geographic both. In other countries, the challenge will be different. So we maybe will have to think about water treatment plants. But it is absolutely essential that we understand that when we think about achieving results, we need to focus on water security, guaranteed access to water, because that is how we will impact development and that is how the other goals will be achieved. So this is a very quick assessment of how we've worked, where we come from, where we're headed. We've approved about $6 billion recently, which is more or less $650 million per year of direct funding. But these 650 have been catalysts for an additional $6 billion. So that's over $12 billion. Now, this sounds like a lot of money, but again, remember the numbers that we've heard this afternoon. It's not even 50% of what is actually needed on a yearly basis in order to achieve our 2030 agenda. So no matter how much we strive from a multilateral point of view, we're going to have to work together. Different stakeholders are going to have to join forces. So this is where we stand. This is what we're focusing on. And as I said, for the most part, we're going to focus on water and sanitization, but we have presence in basins and in irrigation because 70% of water used is actually with the aim of production. So if we want to talk about CO2, which is the elimination of poverty, that's 3 and 2. Well, again, we need to be productive from the point of view of food security. So how do we guarantee access water for irrigation purposes? I'm just going to quickly flip through these slides, but let me share this information with you. The numbers are very telling, but here's another number. This is for comparison purposes. The 16 million of persons who now do not have access to water would be the population of Chile, a little bit more than the population of Ecuador. And that would be the sum total of Bolivia and Uruguay, 1/3 of Argentina, 40% of Spain. So just for a minute, think about all of these persons, all of these countries. Imagine they did not have access to water. I think that this really allows us to understand the degree of the problem, and it allows us to understand that we need to carry out actions to do something about this. And then there's another element which is also very important, which is how can we actually grow our irrigation land? Because we're only looking at 20-25%. And one of our objectives as a region is to grow and foster food security. Well, irrigation is absolutely essential. And again, there we're going to have to be very, very painstaking in order to channel the resources, public and private, in order to improve the competitiveness of that sector. But there's more. This sounds wonderful. These are the numbers. As you know, we go to conferences and we hear the numbers, but there's something looming in the background, which is stress. This was unthinkable in 25 years back, but it's happening now. Cities are drying up. I think that I should begin with the final one, the most recent case, which was Montevideo in Uruguay. We saw that there's stress, and this stress is the result of the different droughts. This was unthinkable before, but it's not new. We begin to see Sao Paulo, for instance, in 2014, 71% of the citizens had to deal with water shortages. Trinidad and Tobago, again, floods. We saw floods in over 80% of the country, swamped by water, and over 150,000 persons affected. La Paz and other cities in Bolivia in the year 2016, where over 340,000 citizens were affected, and actually the different dams were not robust enough. And then there was Petropolis with more floods. When I address this issue, I like to say that an image is very telling, but look at the Cathedral of Luján in Argentina, which was flooded to such a degree that one of the actions that had to be taken was to build resilient infrastructures. This is no longer the exception. This has become the norm. It's not the future. It is the present. This is now. Gaps and how to deal with them. Because what we want is to ensure that citizens' life not be impaired, and we need to ensure that our infrastructures are not hard hit. So this is the variability that we've seen. I think that the element that we need to think of is the associated costs. In Latin America, it's been $28 billion in 20 years, which is 15% of global losses. The problem for Latin America is that we have 8% only of the population of Latin America. So that's being twice as hard hit as any other region because of the droughts. And in the case of floods, it's 35 billion. And we see the temperature rising. There's going to be greater and greater losses. Now, this is difficult from the point of view of life, but of course it's very difficult from the point of view of the economies who see that they are strapped and can no longer invest in order to mitigate these crises. Very quickly now, I think that the message comes through very clearly. We need to invest 3 times the amount we're investing now, and let me be crystal clear, at this point in time, we are not really well poised in budgetary terms, so we need innovation, we need the private sector to engage. So our commitment, this is our response. For the first time in 40 years, there was that global conference, the UN 2023 Water Conference, and CAF committed to growing by 67% its yearly amounts, which is $1 billion directly. This, if we see the context, which calls for $25 billion to be invested, only 25% of the sum total.
But we understand that this message must be supporting the investments. And this is also a message and a sign for all multilaterals and private investors to come on board. And with that $1 billion, it's not just direct funding to the government. We've also started a dialogue as to how we can innovate with different financial products that could be, say, guarantees, direct loans to the subnational entities, bond issuance. It is about using the asset class around water in order for that business case to exist and be fundable in different ways, because one of the key challenges in the sector is not just about value in the water, it's also about generating business around it so that there could be more and more funding around it. I like to think about other sectors that have been developed, say energy, transport. In previous years, this evolutionary process happened when those sectors were priorities, but also they were bankable and fundable. This is one of the big efforts, but we understand that this sign of $1 billion is fundamental. Another of our commitments as a good commodity for the region is the the water security for the region. And I'm going to tell you about the 4 key goals, but it is to have a reference framework for the discussion on public policies at the multi-level, at different levels, not just with the government at the national level, but also with the intermediary governments and the local governments. Because as we know, the water problem is a water continuity from the rivers to the sea, and all the territories are involved in it. Additionally, we've also been working on different projects for pre-investments. CAF has provided up to $25 million of non-refundable funds for projects and studies in terms of water and sanitation. We've already committed $20 million. And once again, here there is also that paradox. There are projects, lack of money, lack of resources, so there is no money, and there are projects. Well, the thing is that neither one or the other. In many occasions, there are very good ideas, but they are not as specific enough. They're not being turned into projects, and they need that financial support, but also the technical quality for them to be implemented. CAF understands that one of its missions is to be there and incubate these quality projects so that they can be funded later on through any of the funding measures that there may exist. But the important is for the project to reach the society and to get the outcome. And additionally, we've also tried to position as representatives of the region, and Christian mentioned it already. We understand that the region is a region that is also the region itself is a solution for global challenges in terms of how to promote the Latin American vision in the public discussions, public political discussions. Not only these 9 dialogues and next year's dialogue, like Christian said, is going to be a great party, but it is a good space for these kind of discussions. We've taken with us decision makers from Latin America to also understand the European good decisions, but also for Europeans to see what are the problems in Latin America, because that also contributes to these information sharing that we've talked about, investment sharing, exchanging information, experiences, and so on. So the idea is to position ourselves in the political public policies. And Argentina is now one of the leaders in terms of funding for water projects. And this is something we've achieved together with other development agencies. It's been about rethinking the business models of public banks. Over 60 world public banks having joined our dialogue. The idea is to see the investment sector in a way that it is profitable enough in order to provide this funding. This is growing and growing. We're talking to more and more stakeholders to once again create products and have financial support. We still belong to the World Water Council, and we are more and more present in the big discussion fora, both in the technical boards and the board of management for the Global Water Partnership. And this is to put the region at the core of the discussions on water, which is fundamental. With regards to water safety, there are 4 key goals: improving governance and the management of floods and droughts. We've done this. We've conducted analysis of the different legislation in the different Latin American countries. Unfortunately, we didn't pass the test. And when I said we didn't pass the test, that means that legislation is not comprehensive enough in order to see a comprehensive vision of the use and the management of the water resources. The different levels of the society are not incorporated in order to understand that the management of the water must be equalitarian and just and sustainable. And this must be boundary as well, because water doesn't have administrative borders. The water from one side of the country is as valuable as the water on the other side of the country, and therefore the management must be coordinated. That dialogue has not happened, and we think we play a key role in order to promote that dialogue. And of course, policies for the urgent difficulty that we're facing in terms of floods and droughts, and then direct funding issues, promoting safe access at the urban level and the rural level of access to water and sanitation. And a new message here, not just about the amount of water, it's about the quality of water. That's also important. And then we have to work on prevention, and we have to reduce the pollution of water bodies. Again, this comes hand in hand with the climate crisis. And we must start working, and it's therefore true that the different ministries are starting to work together, environment, public works, and finance, in order to reduce the pollution. And as I said at the beginning of my presentation, we need to focus more and more on defining or innovating on products and services that could improve or increase the access to funding from a productive point of view in order to be able to access irrigation. And finally, what have we concluded that are the 4 key elements that must exist in order to escalate the funding and in order to meet this ambitious goal of all this amount of money? First of all, the stability of the country and the development of the countries. We need to have a coherent macroeconomic framework that can attract investors. But we must start having a fundamental element, which is the dimension of the assessment of the environmental care. It is this must be a priority, not just for the governments, but also amongst the citizens. From the institutionality point of view, there is a big need to work with the responsible institutions within the sector. They must be solid in their management, in their regulation, and they also have to have that capacity to comply with their legislation, and also they must have a multi-level coordination. The sanitation of a small municipality of 500 people in the region is important, but it's also important in a big city, because once the pollution occurs, everything in a small place, everything will get polluted. Then there are other things that are associated to promoting investment, and more and more with sectors like circular economy and solutions based on nature. Not just has to be in our speeches. That must be included in the regulation and the investment schemes, and in the different cities of Brazil and other countries. And that is why in these cities we have started with pilot projects based on nature in order to generate change. And finally, and related to the pre-investment item, we must make an effort in order to have more and more bankable projects. We haven't got the luxury to wait for years in order to conclude the study of a project, because every time we delay 3-4 years to have a definite design, the losses related to floods and droughts spoil our GDP and the life of our citizens. Thank you, and thank you again for being here.
Muchísimas
Thank you very much, Mr. Cárdenas, for your interesting presentation. There's no doubt that the figures that you've provided on the investment needs on water and sanitation in the region are definitely very revealing. Also, the presentation of the voluntary commitments and the water security agenda developed by CAF, as well as the detailed description of the necessary conditions in order to expand the funding, have been crucial aspects that have helped us better understand the current situation and the steps to be taken. We also thank the rest of the authorities for their valuable contributions in this opening session of the 9th edition of the Water Dialogues. And before continuing, I'd like to share with you I'd like to remind you that we're sharing these relevant ideas on the social media with the CAF and eAgua accounts, and I encourage you to take part in this conversation. Now we going to frame today's topic, and as such, we start on the first session of the program, which is focused on the action plans and the commitments for the 2030 agenda. First of all, we have the pleasure of welcoming Teodoro Estrella, which is Director General for Water at the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge in Spain. Mr. Estrella will give us a presentation focused on the challenges and the funding of water management plans in order to guarantee water safety in Spain. Mr. Estrella, you have the floor. Good afternoon. Good morning to those of you who are listening from Latin America and the Caribbean. It is for me a pleasure to once again take part in the Water Dialogues organized by the CAF. And in this case, these are the 9th Water Dialogues that are held here at the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. I'm going to give you a presentation on the challenges and the fundings of the water management plans of the third cycle in our country, in Spain. These plans focus on issues related to the improvement of water safety. They particularly focus on incorporating resources from the reuse and the salinating processes of the sea, from the water from the sea. They also focus on the sanitation and treatment. Well, our country has made a lot of progress in recent years. Right now, we are treated pretty much 90% of the polluting load of those populations of over 200,000 inhabitants. or equivalent, but there's still a long way to go to reach 100%. And also we face the challenge related to the directive of wastewaters, the new directive on wastewaters that is now being discussed and developed, and very likely at the beginning of next year it will be passed. Another important element on these plans is the restoration or the recovery of our rivers and aquifers. And the recovery of the rivers also linked to the protection against flooding. Always, when possible, prioritizing nature-based solutions that on the one hand allow us to recover, but at the same time protect ourselves from floods. And they also focus on the fight against diffuse pollution. In Spain, we have a lot of groundwaters and aquifers with pollution, nitrate-related pollution problems. Well, the set of water management plans in Spain, the inter-community plans, which are the ones managed by the state, and the intra-community plans that are managed by the autonomous communities, represent a total investment for the next years up until 2027 of 37 billion euros, of which 40 billion euros are going to be managed by the central government. In Spain, the three administrations have different powers in different states, in different regions, based on the type of action, based on whether we're talking about inter-river basins or intra-community river basins. Finally, as I say, the central administration is going to conduct an investment of about 14 billion euros, as I said, in the coming years. And where are those investments going to focus? Well, the biggest amount, the biggest sum will be allocated to sanitation, with over 10 billion euros out of those 37 billion euros. And this is quite a reasonable figure with regards to the treatment of the load on our water treatment plants. Also, the set of infrastructures for irrigation projects, supply, new systems for the reuse of treated wastewater, salinating plants, the development of photovoltaic plants in order to reduce the costs of desalinated waters is quite important. I said 12 billion euros out of that set of 37 billion euros. And the question is, how is that going to be financed? How this big investment is going to be funded? Well, I'm going to focus particularly on the central administration. How do we intend to fund those sums? Well, first of all, part of it will come from investments from canons, fees received by the river basin bodies, different canons related to the waste of different residues, and also the budget law. Also transfers to the different hydrographic confederations, but also the European funds. We will see that in the coming years, this will represent a very important item, both with relation to part of the resilience and recovery plan, but also the regional funds, the European development funds. These are the funding resources that we have in our country. And I would say that if we analyze the coming years from 2021, where we started the planning period, up to 2027, our expectations, our forecast is to have contributions of about a bit more than 12 billion euros out of those 40 billion euros that I mentioned before. If we analyze where those amounts are coming from, we will see that part of them are coming from the revenues that are being collected in the different basin bodies. This is an item of 2.3 billion euros. Another part comes from the state general budget, with a total of 3.7 billion euros, and a very big part also comes from the European funds. We are lucky enough that this plan of actions is going to count on important sections from the European funds, both for the recovery plan, like the Secretary of State of Economy mentioned, due to the pandemic that we suffered a few years ago already, but based on the economic transformation in the different states of the European Union, we're going to have this access to these funds, as I was saying. The funds that we're getting from the ERDF, we are talking about 5.6 billion euros, and also some contribution of the state cooperation or state associations that we have in our state administration. The idea is the development and construction of water plants, and that also includes big items, big sums for different items in those budgets. So, but that we still have a gap. We still don't meet the 14 billion euros that we have included in the plans, but the gap is not very big. And also, if you look at the figure in the corresponding column for 2027, theoretically, we would not be getting any other funds from the Resilience and Recovery Transformation Plan that ends on 2026. So obviously, for that year, we will need to get some additional funding, or we'll need to increase the funding either through revenues into the confederations or through the funding coming from the state budget. And I mentioned this PRTR plan, the Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan. I want to talk about this because this PRTR plan represents 4.7 billion euros, which we'll also have to invest very quickly. This is actually a challenge for all the administrations involved, the public administrations involved. Out of those 4.7 billion euros, nearly 3 billion are related to transfers. These are direct contributions, and 1.8 billion will be loans that must be returned under rather favorable conditions. And I'd like to mention that the funds received from this PRTR are for actions that are within the European Green Deal, the European Water Green Deal. This has got to do with sanitation, treatment, savings, reuse, security of the infrastructures, recovery of rivers, aquifers, protections against floods, digital transformation. There are 2 lines of actions related to digitization, but also for the replacement of resources that are overexploited in our aquifers and our systems, for the use of our systems that must be replaced by other alternative or complementary resources. And I also mentioned about 2 lines of action related to the digitalization, and this is my last slide. In March last year, the Council of Ministers approved a strategic project for the recovery and economic transformation for the digitalization of the water cycle. This so-called PERTE, I always say that Spain has very fragile balances with regards to resources, demands, and environmental requirements that will be worsened through or as a result of the impact of climate change. Therefore, it is important to focus on this. Our country has to be very aware of how the water is being used, how it's being caught, how it's being allocated, how it's also returning it back to the rivers and the aquifers, both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity. And this was the key goal of the PRTE. It's true that it's also in time incorporating other elements. It has 4 lines of action. One is governance, it's about changes in the regulatory framework. Also, improvement of the digitalization of the water administrations, both the water confederations and the water administrations of the intra-community basins. And the most important item, which is the development of support programs to promote digitalization of all sectors, the urban water cycle and the irrigation sector, but also the industrial sector. And finally, there's also a line of action related to something that is very important, which is training and innovation. We're talking about a total of a project that will mobilize 3 billion euros. 1.9 billion euros will come directly from the public administration, the general administration, but we also expect to attract investment as part of a public-private collaboration of around 1 billion euros. Since we not funded 100% of the actions, but a percentage, depending on the type of actions, depending on the project, the funding is different, and that will represent at least 1/3 of the amount mobilized by this PERT project for the water cycle. So in Spain, we're talking about a lot of money. We're talking about a lot of money. It is also true that initially we have those sources to be able to fund those actions. And the gap that we have, well, we'll have to see how we solve it. Okay? Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias, señor Estrella.
Thank you very much, Mr. Estrada, Director General of Water, for contextualizing the situation of Spain with regards to planning of actions in order to move forward towards water safety. And now we will have 4 experts on the topic to talk about the action plans and the commitments in order to meet the Agenda 2030 goals, water-related. I'd like to now invite the members of this panel, started by the moderator, Franz Rojas Ortuste, Director of Analysis and Technical Evaluation of Water and Sanitation at CAF. And the members of the panel, Ana Carolina Argolo Nascimento de Castro, Director of the National Water and Sanitation Agency in Brazil. This is Ana, ANA. Also Ruben Aleman, President of the National Administration of Aqueducts and Sewage, ANDA, ANDA, in El Salvador, and Maria Fernanda Espinosa, expert of the Global Commission on the Water Economy of the OECD. Dear moderator, whenever you have the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here taking part of the 9th Water Dialogues on a very important topic that has already been mentioned by the previous speakers. So we're quickly going to get into the topic. It is a great pleasure to have on the one hand the Global Commission on Water Economy, represented by its commissioner, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, but also representatives from the ANA Brazil, the Brazil National Agency, their director, Ana Carolina de Nascimento, and also the president of the National Administration of Waters and Sewage in Salvador, ANDA, who is in charge of all these type of services in the whole Republic of Salvador. Well, I'd like to start by asking a very generic question, picking it up from what Ángel Cárdenas was mentioned about these 4 enabling conditions. He obviously talked about macroeconomic stability, social stability, but also he talked about how to care for the environment, how to assess the care for the environment. I'd like to ask Maria Fernanda, this year they actually published an important document in March in New York, which was something like about reorienting the current or turning the tide, okay? Something like this, turning the tide. I don't think there is a Spanish version. And it analyzed 7 critical points when they call us to think about the water cycle as a good commodity, the interaction between water and climate, also subsidies, and how to focus the subsidies better, because in some cases we may be talking about per year's subsidies, and probably how to focus on the most needed subsidies. So I'd like to ask you, Maria Fernanda, from the Global Commission, how do you all see this idea of rethinking the water? Which would be the enabling conditions in order to translate this into public policies? You have the floor. Well, thank you very much, Franz. It is a great pleasure to be here today in this 9th Water Dialogues. I listened to the recent convention or agreement of the government of Spain to increase the financial capacity of the CAF. That is a really good news, and I'd like to congratulate CAF for the new strategy on water safety 2023-2026. I think it is a very powerful tool, and I like to say that I'm really happy that the director of ANA from Brazil is here as well, because otherwise I would have been the only woman in the panel. So I'm really happy that that we're all here. I'd like to say hi to the Deputy Prime Minister of Barbados.
To have you here among us. Luego, respondiendo a tu...
Then, in order to answer to your question, Franz, as you know, the Global Commission on the Water Economy is a commission that is chaired by the Director General of the OMEC, Ngozi, and Mariana Mazzucato, and Johan Rostro. These are the members of the board of the commission, and also then there's us, the representatives from different places. The headquarters is in the OECD, but the voices and the experience come from Africa, Latin America, Asia, just everywhere in the world. Therefore, this is not a vision of the OECD, it is a global vision. I have a set of slides that I think will facilitate explaining the work that we perform. And I'll tell you briefly, basically, what is the collective exercise that we are carrying out in our commission. And I was carefully listening to the presentations. I could see the graphs and the excellent video from the beginning. And of course, the impacting thing is that in Latin America and the Caribbean, the water-related disasters have doubled since the 80s. That gives us a hint, and it tells us that it's not just that there is a lot of water or very little water or polluted water. The idea is that the articulation between climate change and water crisis is very closely linked. Both things are very closely linked to each other, and that is got to do with how we assess and value the water, how we invest on water, which goes far beyond water and sanitation. In our region in particular, that must be a priority, because when we think that 66% of the population has not access to sanitation, or 25% of the population does not have access to drinking water, it becomes obvious that that has to be a priority for the management. But when we talk about the link between climate change and water, what we're looking into from the Commission is the realization that, for example, half the aquifers in the world are emptying. This is not a Latin American crisis. This is a global crisis. 35% of the wetlands of the world, all those great reservoirs of water, these great natural water filters, have actually been lost since 1970.
35% of them. And this, well, this is an impact. Of course it is, because what it means is that everything is at risk. Not only making good on SDG 6, also, as we've heard, achieving Agenda 2030 sum total, because we cannot think about eradication of poverty, extreme poverty, and so on, if we don't have guaranteed supplies of water. We cannot optimize healthcare systems if we don't have guaranteed water and sanitation. We cannot think of fighting hunger if we don't invest in water. So water is the backbone. Water is the leitmotif of the 17 objectives. And this calls for new governance and investment designs. We've heard, and I agree, we all agree, that it's not only about quantity. No, it's also quality of the investments and of the governance systems with them. We've seen that there's not much quantity if you think about what our needs are. And furthermore, this is all about funding much more than water and sanitization. And let me explain why. Basically, we need to invest in any given economy that will run within the planetary limits, that will defend ecological cycles. And this has to do with food systems, and it has to do with models for production and consumption, and sectors that are consumers, mining and other industries. We need to see then the issue that has to do with efficiency in water for irrigation purposes and agriculture. So we need to see what sectors call for more investment and what sectors don't call for that much investment. So just a piece of worrying information. I've just downloaded the most recent report from the Commission, which is very scientific, hard science, and the data we have, let's see, I'm trying to share my slides. Okay, here's the pointer. So basically, recent findings tell us that we have actually surpassed 6 of the 9 limits. One of them, of course, is having crossed the threshold of water. In other words, we use more water than the ecosystems can regenerate. And among others, we've also used more of the space, which is the underlying reason for climate change. So we need to contemplate the cycle as a common good, which calls for different types of governance and different types of investments. So we're actually contemplating focusing more on green water, what we call green water. So blue water is what we see, it's there, but green, this is contained by transpiration. This might seem to be technical, very technical, but it's absolutely essential. Why? Because the Earth can decide that CO2, and that's 25-25. They're absorbed by means those ecosystems, and the other 25% by oceans, and 50% is released into the atmosphere. So this green water as a regulator of climate is absolutely essential. This green water as a tool in order to adapt to climate change. So for instance, and I'm talking more as a specialist in geography, but rain. We say here drought, here flood, it's raining too much, it's raining too little. Well, the alteration of rainfall happens because 50% of rainfall is generated via evapotranspiration on land. In other words, on terrestrial ecosystems, and 50% in oceans. Okay. Thank you. And I was saying that rainfall is regulated via green water. So we heard about solutions that are nature-based. In fact, investments that have to do with maintaining green water, maintaining the ecosystems, is absolutely essential. It is fundamental when we think about a new equation. I'm going to stop here. I think that we could talk about this afterwards. And I need to say that this idea of the cycle, we're not talking about resources, blue water resources. No, we're talking about the hydro cycle, which needs to be understood to be a common good and subject to shared responsibility, shared accountability, and also new designs of global governance in order to respond to your question. Hans, thank you very much to Maria Fernanda Espinosa. There's no doubt that the cycle is a common good, and this is a concept which is of tremendous importance, which must be furthered if we are to logically address the issue of green water and other aspects that definitely call for another different conversation. I think that we will be looking at this in the future. Now, I'd like to ask a question. This is for Ana Carolina Argolo and also for Ruben Aleman. It has to do very much with what we talked about, droughts, floods, and we can afterwards talk about sanitization. So Ana Carolina, back in 97, there was legislation passed, and this has advanced very much in basin comprehensive management of water resources. This is important for all of Latin America. And Ana has participated in the plan, which is a master plan which implements national policies, and also has led Atlas Brazil, which is a very useful tool for planning purposes. And the Ana also is in charge of vulnerability and floods. So these tools, if you will, the Atlas and so on, we would like to know what the challenges are. What kind of investments are necessary? What is Brazil thinking about in order to comprehensively manage basins and manage, of course, droughts and floods? Maybe you could also talk a little bit about how you match the funding needs. Well, thank you very much. I'm very proud to be here with all of your good selves, and I thank the authorities for the opportunity of sharing with you what we do in Brazil. And as we hear, we need to think about what the investments are that are necessary in the country. And these are the studies that look for an orientation of the infrastructures before the actual operation. So how to deal with all of the different elements, treatment plants and so on. I'm going to speak a little bit about each one of the studies in question very quickly. So Atlas, vulnerability, the National Plan for Water Security, our National Plan for Resources. Well, these are examples that allow us to think about the priorities in Brazil. And this is an example which makes it difficult to think about the kind of investments that we would need, which were actually raised by the national plan in Brazil. And this identified the fact that over 3,000 municipalities in Brazil, which is like 55% of the sum total of municipalities, did not meet the necessary needs, water needs that had been forecast for 2025. So investments are necessary in order to ensure that we have enough water for public needs, thinking about growing the existing systems or other new sources of water. Now, vulnerability, floods. This identified 13,948 of elements in water. So 70% of those are maps which are deemed to be vulnerable to potential floods. And this calls for different investments. This report resulted in maps that studied the different vulnerabilities, which allow us to focus in our public spending the different public policies designed to prevent and mitigate in Brazil. And this by means of different structural and non-structural measures. We are at this point updating this map with more information, studying the natural disasters that have taken place over the past few years. And I think it's going to be interesting because we see what is in place in the different provinces in Brazil. So our national plan in 2019, there was a sum total of projects that looked at infrastructures which are in place and which call for investments to the tune of 5.2 billion euros. And this is a way of dealing with emerging challenges.
No intervalo 2022-2040.
So we're talking here about different results to be achieved. So there were programs in place, 23 sub-programs, one specific program to deal with the critical water events. So this is a program which calls for 8 different methods, different strategies to minimize the adverse effects of these critical events. So this is a summary of all of the reports which were presented. This is very important when we think about the different initiatives and protocols that are in place. So indeed, we need to manage these critical events, and we need to think also of having the necessary systems in place for our priority basins. In the case of major waterworks in Brazil, financial efforts have been borne by the state. In other words, the money is public. So most investments are public, as I say, but more recently, there is an attempt to increase that by reaching out to the private sector for major works to be carried out in the country. The so-called PPI, this is a very important plan in Brazil. There are 8 initiatives currently underway for these public-private partnerships, and they call for contributions for the field of irrigation and a strategic plan. We've heard talk about that. This is a very important project that calls for the transfer of water from one basin to another. It's the San Francisco River project involving different basins, which are very important. The PIS also is a part of the public-private partnership. It is a strategic project, and it calls for the overhaul of a contract, different operations and maintenance, and undertaking of activities forecast for the month of September 2025, so nearly 2 years hence. Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. You said 5 billion euros in 2035? 5.2 billion. 5.2 billion. Okay, thank you. Well, that's a lot of money. And it has to do with the size of the country, of course, because you're over 200 million population. Ruben, please. Along these lines, and afterwards we can talk about sanitation, but you're in charge of water and sanitation, yes, but if we think about what we've just heard, if we think about what Maria Fernanda just described, we understand that the assets, the infrastructure itself need to be resilient. So this conversation about what is a resilient infrastructure, that's a question. And in the case of El Salvador, Central America, and the Caribbean, we see that recurrently we see El Nino and La Nina, which exacerbate its climate change. So it exacerbates droughts and floods. And now there's another phenomenon, another El Nino, and the impact is surely going to be major in your part of the world. So what does ANDA do in order to bolster, to encourage its short-term resiliency, and what kind of investment does this call for? Well, first, thank you so very much for having invited me. I am truly honored to be here with all of yourselves. I speak on behalf of a new El Salvador where water security is absolutely essential for our president. Now, as to resiliency and as to infrastructure, we are a tiny country in Central America, and we are very, very much affected by that variability, by climate change, extreme weather events, storms, tropical storms, and tropical drought. And when we talk about resiliency, infrastructure, and resiliency, over the past few years, we as a country, as the main operator for drinking water and sanitation, well, we're focusing on innovation and we're focusing on technology and we're focusing on development. Our main sources are, well, rivers. The river Lempa, which is a huge river. And that is where our drinking water comes from. And along these lines, the bed changes in the winter, in the summer. Everything changes. So we need to be well prepared. We need to have protocols in place and contingency measures in place. And by the way, just a couple of weeks ago, thanks to the government of the United States of America, we were able to buy 3 ultrasonic buoys. Now, what is that? Why do you need that? Well, these 3 buoys are anchored in the bed at the mouth where we receive the water, and then 1 kilometer down, we begin to transform this raw water and turn it into drinking water. And thanks to sunlight, it triggers an ultrasonic wave, which 500 meters down limits the production of algae. Why? Because during the dry season, we have a concentration of nitrogen, phosphorus, organic matter, light, high temperatures, and those are the perfect ingredients for eutrophication. And when I have that concentration, when I have that proliferation, as we've seen, well, algae, well, they're toxic, and toxins are toxic. And the result is a fishy smell in the water, and all of this, these buoys, as I say, these ultrasonic buoys, actually put an end to that cycle of insurance and quality control. And by the way, these buoys are the only ones that are set up in the region in a place where water is taken up and sanitized. So yes, we're working hard. We're preparing for a threat. We're working hard to be ready for El Nino. But apart from that, what we want to do is reduce water that is not accounted for. Now, that might be surprising, but in ANDA, we lose about 60% of the water we produce. It leaks. Why? Well, because I have pipelines. I like to say that they're from a long time ago. These are pipelines that are half a century ago. We have illegal pipes. We lack micro and macro measurement. And this is something which really surprised me yesterday when we visited Valencia, and I asked them how much water is not accounted for, and they say about 10%. Well, in Central America, and all my peers will say that it's more or less 50, 60%. So it's not anything I'm making up here. It's not unique to El Salvador, but I do believe that we're working hard, all of us, with our peers in Central America. We're cooperating, South-South cooperation, in order to shorten the distance, because it's very important in the face of El Nino. Now, when you talk about investments, I think, actually, no, I'm convinced that if our organizations are transparent and accountable, this generates trust, and trust generates funding. And this is how, historically, ANDA had never had an investment portfolio as it has now. I'm going to give you some numbers now. It's more than $300 million, which are going to become something good for Salvadorians. We're talking about multilateral banking. We're talking about countries that are friends, that want development. So the US, China, Spain, of course. Spain is helping so very much in rural areas where variability and hydric stress is so marked. The community of the Basque Country, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, among others. Thank you. Thank you, Ruben. Those 300 million, do they include access to water and sanitation, or these 300 just go to guarantee resiliency and cut losses? My answer to that is that we focus, that's the World Bank. They focus on resilient infrastructure, but also loans, which are focusing on ensuring that unbilled water goes to rehabilitation of zones that might lead to an improvement in the water resources. Thank you. Let me now ask about universal access. But back to Ana Carolina and back to Ruben, and then we will close with the expert from the Global Commission. So Ana Carolina, you talked about the hard work underway to guarantee water security, but something which I think is very striking, which has called our attention, is the new framework in place, which in Brazil, this actually includes drinking water, sewage, rainwater, collection of solid waste. So I think that what's most interesting is reaching out to private investments as part of the challenges included in the plan for 2030. Recently, you granted an interview and you talked about private contributions to deal with these investments. So what is the magnitude of the investment, specifically in drinking water and so on, the basics, as it were? And do you think it's possible, the way things are now, do you think that it's going to be possible to implement that very interesting investment? In Brazil, we have a new framework which was implemented in 2020. The diagnosis in Brazil we have to think about focusing on basic treatment. We're talking here about drinking water. We're talking about sewage. We're thinking about investments, nearly 70 billion euros, and 26.5 would go for water, 1 billion, and 40-something billion for sewage. So an average of 5.1 million euros per year. Despite the gradual increase as of 19 of those investments in basic treatment, Brazil has not achieved the necessary level to ensure that the objectives are achieved. They're included in our plan and in the new framework that looks to the year 2033. So the providers of services guarantee that it's usually the public state banks, although other resources are available. We have the different savings banks involved and the National Development Bank in Brazil. The conditions, financial cost, terms offered by public banks are more compatible now. We're talking about different social externalities, and at this point in time, we can see that they're more attractive than the conditions specified by private banks, although more recently, public savings banks have also contributed to carrying out these activities. We have financial institutions also involved, the ones who focus on development, and here we would include multilateral agencies. But notwithstanding this, there are different institutions that have different conditions in place, and we continue to have problems with some specificities that make it possible to access these conditions in Brazil. So, for instance, when funding is in foreign currency, in FX, the entities in question are mandated to guarantee protection in the face of possible risk of foreign exchange. So this makes the rate more expensive, and this might result in turn in a sharp increase, and that especially should there be a devaluation of the real. But there are other instances of funding with reals, and this might make it possible to invest in the future. We also know that there's another series of relevant activities that have grown in the funding of these basic activities in Brazil, but the capitals market is not a very active source of funding for these activities. In general, these emissions are concentrated in very few companies, and we're talking about rates of return limited to 6 years. That is how things stand today in Brazil. And we see furthermore that there's private investment instruments in the market. So, for instance, the rental market and loans, which represent a small portion of the monies available. They're actually more frequently used for different investments that guarantee rapid returns. So very difficult to provide funding by public banks because of the costs in question. We don't have much experience with co-funding in Brazil, and the potential funders would join forces, would work together, would clearly define the necessary regulatory mechanisms, reaching different agreements between and among the creditors, and then exchange of warranties. So in Brazil, there is room for diversification of funding for this sector, and this would be thanks to activities in the capital markets. So yes, there are many, many challenges, but we will overcome the challenges because there is the possibility of accessing long-term loans in reals, better conditions thanks to activities in the capital markets, which tend to fine-tune the deadlines, the maturity dates, adapting to the reality in Brazil, and ensuring that there is a diversification of the different instruments in place that would guarantee the necessary means to launch these activities. And there is a clear need to ensure that we access the necessary sources of funding to generate the necessary incentives to ensure market competition, to encourage new players and funding agents in the market.
In order to attract investments to our country, private investments, in order to get a universal situation, it is absolutely fundamental for Brazil to have the guarantee of regulatory safety, which is something we've both focused on, legal security, contractual security for the sector of businesses. This is all important for all that sanitation scenario to change. And that is something that the new regulatory framework will affect Brazil. The legislators gave Brazil a very good, important role as for the creation of reference entities at the national level in the sanitation sector. And the subnational regulators, say provincial or regional or provincial regulators, are encouraged to adjust to the national regulatory guidelines. So these are the national guidelines that should serve as a reference point. But the national regulator, the regionalization of the service provision of sanitation are preconditions to access public state resources. There is expectation that from this new framework, we will achieve some uniformity and the standardization of the regulatory procedures that already exist in the country. That way, we will reduce costs in general, also reduce obstacles. And also, we will reduce obstacles to the arrival of new private agents and new private investors. The drafting of the reference guidelines is being done by the members of all the segments of the society. Different sectors are represented in these meetings. The idea is to improve the regulatory situation of the sector. All the norms that are being previewed in a regulatory agenda, and all the information is available. We have already launched 3 standards. We calculate that by the end of 2024, we would conclude with 17 standards, that are necessary for us to be able to attract investments and funding and subsidies for the sector to meet the set out goals. Thank you very much, and muito obrigado for trying to speak Spanish. Obviously, it is a lot of important things have been mentioned, and I think within this new sanitation framework, you also mentioned it is a great opportunity for the capital markets. And apart from that, there's another panel later to talk about innovation, but I think that means there are opportunities for the national public banks, the Water Final Coalition commitment, where CAF is leading, and that has got to do with how multilateral banking can attract public national banks to invest more in water and sanitation. But there's no doubt that what you said, and it's got to do with what Maria Fernanda mentioned, is the legal security, the contractual security, and institutionality. And I think Anna, with over 25 years of sustained work, she has a very good idea of what kind of institutionality we expect in Latin American countries. Well, we're running out of time, so I wanted to ask Ruben, and then I'll close with Maria Fernanda. Now we want to focus a bit more on the challenges for universal access to water and sanitation. We saw that in the region there are over 160 million people without safe access to water, over twice that for access to sanitation. The treatment of wastewater is an important process as well. You already talked a little bit about efficiency, but I'd like you now to focus on the challenges to achieve that desired universality that we all countries feel. Well, I think it is important, and the institution I did so from day one, to set out that navigation map and that compass that tells us where we need to go. And in ANDA, our association, we established a basis line with 5 axes, and everything is related to those pillars, if you want. First of all, we're talking about water supply. Secondly, we're talking about the quality of the water. Thirdly, we're talking about energy efficiency. Fourth, sanitation. And fifth, customer service. In each of these pillars, we have taken actions and there is progress. But if something works, the key operator, I want to tell you that in the rural area, we're operating with 90%. The rural area is the problem because there is where I have 50% less coverage. That means I have more coverage in the urban area than in the rural area. But in the rural area is where countries and cooperation agencies like Spain have been crucial for decades already, and particularly in the recent years in El Salvador. And there is where I have a very important water stress. I have climate variability and drought, and there is where the families truly need that access to drinking water. If you live in the capital of the country and you go to those places, you see how people actually search again and again to search for water, and you see their situation. Sometimes we take it for granted when we live in the capital. You think you just open your tap and have water for over 5 minutes just to brush your teeth. Seriously, that impacts the life of everyone. There is a before and after, and I was saying that we have more funds than ever. And so who are those people or those multilateral banks and those agencies that are helping us? Well, the Inter-American Development Bank. The key here will be the rehabilitation of one of the key production systems that takes water to Great San Salvador, which currently has 80% impairment, as well as all the micrometrics, changing pipes. And that is very important also. Governance and institutional strengthening. That is incredibly important. Next, the World Bank. It is the first time that the World Bank is investing in Salvador an additional $100 million on infrastructure and resilience. And the key part of this loan will be that change, the renewal of those pipes. Because it doesn't matter if I renew the production sources if the pipes are from who knows when, really backdated. Next is the Economic Integration Ibero-American Bank. Here, there's a technical remuneration that is non-refundable, and it's very important in order to conduct assessments of production systems that are really, they're impaired by about 50%. And then CAF joined or entered Salvador. We already aligning all the stars for that. I think we will soon be able to announce this. We're talking about $75 million for the Lempa River, upstream Lempa River. This is very important because if we don't have healthy basins and resilient basins, we will not have healthy and resilient cities. Also, we will focus on sanitation and we'll also focus on reforestation. One of our key commitments is green infrastructure. And I liked what you said, that the CAF has a vision consisting on becoming that green bank. And it's really good that we'll be able to contribute with that concept of reforestation. So I think that having the basis and having that business plan, having that strategic institutional plan, means that we are on the right path. However, this would never be possible if we didn't have transparency or trust. And now we have the challenge ahead of us. We need to execute. It's not just about using the money. It's about showing results that could be translated into benefits for all the people from El Salvador. Thank you very much, Ruben. Well, we've had excellent contributions, but then last but not least, thank you very much, Maria Fernanda, for waiting. Now, based on the comments on investment requirements and associated challenges, something that has also been rather recurrent is talking about efficiency on the expenditure of the resources, and as well as governance as enabling element. We also say in CAV that governance and funding, there are two sides of the same coin because both need each other. So just like I asked you before about rethinking the economic value of the water, I now like to ask you from the Global Commission, I'd like to ask you about your feedback to rethink the funding. Well, thank you, Franz. And the thing is, I'm actually learning a lot listening to Anna and Anda. And I like to do two things. I know that we're running out of time, but I'd like to give you a very short reflection on what I listened to. And I'd also like to share 3 key topics that, in my opinion, could be left for the subsequent discussion. I commit myself to share with CAV a set of slides from the last information we have. It's not definite, but we're working on it in order to include it into the next report from the Water Commission. So some feedback on what I've listened to. I'm not an expert on water, right? But firstly, I think the idea of investing on maintaining infrastructure is absolutely fundamental. And it's not an issue just exclusive of El Salvador. It's a world problem from what we've seen in the work of the Water Commission. And that has to do with prioritizing the investment as well. And number 2 is the idea of linking water safety with social cohesion, security, preventing migration, and so on. And I say this because of everything related to the relationship between the water stress and the displacement of people. We're now talking about climate migrants and climate refugees. And I think we will soon have to talk about water refugees, because this problem that we see in the dry corridor in Central America, we're seeing it in other parts of the world, like this is Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that transsectorial equation is very important. And it's not just a transsectorial equation at the domestic level, but I say that I feel that regional cooperation is more necessary than ever in order to face and understand the problem of water. And now 3 reflections from the perspective of the work that we carry out in our commission. The first need, and this is not a concluded work, but we need to redefine water, the different colors of the water, because we're not only talking about the water in the river. It's the whole water scheme that makes us more and more interdependent, that requires more and more cooperation, and that requires more and more co-responsibility mechanisms. And this is not a minor issue, because it's also got to do with not just governance, but also the structures, the dynamics, and the funding mechanisms. Therefore, water, we must include water in a systemic understanding of water itself. And I think water must be connected in an intersectorial fashion. For many years, I've been a civil servant in the government, and I don't remember being called, for example, from the Minister of Water to address all the issues related to food safety, health, and so on, and all those other interrelated issues. So I think that transsectorial outlook is important in order to predefine the water. So we need to include green water into that new definition, because without green water, without the capacity of since the evapotranspiration of systems, we will be facing a very serious water stress problem at a global level, not just in our region. The second point, well, if you have a different concept, a more comprehensive concept of water, well, the assessment mechanisms that we currently have are not sufficient, and that is what we're working on. We need to see how to assess water within a logic of the water systems, the water cycle. And what does this mean in practical terms? Well, it means, for example, tracking the water in the supply chains and in the value chains. So how do we identify the so-called invisible water, the water that is contained within the value chains and in the supply chains? It means how do we also quantify in the agreements, in the international trade agreements, the water component. And that has a lot to do with the funding mechanisms. And there are also other topics that we're working on. For example, the subsidies systems, the adjustment of rates that incorporate the costs associated to green water and environmental services, common water as an environmental service. It is obvious that this discussion has implications at the municipality level and at the country level, but also at the regional level and at global level. And the third point I'd like to highlight is not just about the new definition, new assessment mechanisms and instruments, but also an active voice from the water sector in the current discussions related to the reform of the international financial architecture. That is absolutely vital. We have with us the Deputy Minister of Barbados. Barbados is a country that is currently leading initiatives like the Bridgetown Initiative, which is about rethinking the multilateral banking system. I would like to listen to the voice and the experience of the CAF in this regard. We need a new financial framework on water to focus on the adaptation and to climate change and resilience to climate change, because this is interlinked. For example, I've been in very few discussions on water when they were setting out the reference terms for the operation of the losses and damages funds. In the Climate Change Convention, when it comes to these funds, the water must be part of the discussion. For the first time in history, the COP28, where I'm traveling right tomorrow, there is a section, there is a day specifically dedicated to water and food systems for the first time in the 28 COPs that we've held. So connecting that discussion is fundamental, in my opinion, because it's not just the recapitalization of multilateral banking systems. It's not only about rethinking the governance mechanism, but it's also about including all the systems related to conditions, loan mechanisms, and so on. We're also working on restructuring the debts for UN climate. And I think it's also relevant when we talk or when we think about this need of $365 billion for Latin America in the water sector. The ideal scenario is saying the private sector is coming, let's have blended finance, let's have partnerships with the private sector. But we see that the private sector, unfortunately, it always arrives late, and it's never enough. That is, unfortunately, something we must recognize, but a lot of the resources that we're going to need are going to have to be public resources. And therefore, we need to rethink for the private sector how we redefine the risks and how do we redefine the commitments on sustainability from the private sector. That is a shift of culture, mindset. We need to count on private participation, of course, and I gave you the name of the agency. But anyway, I say that there is a lot of hope when we see what the CAF is doing. They're doing an excellent work. The Water Commission is at your total disposal in order to continue to work together. And I like to see ourselves lifting the flag in the current discussions on the reform process of the international financial system. Thank you once again for your invitation, friends and friends from the CAF. It's been a pleasure, and we can continue discussing. Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda.
Llegando al término de este primer.
We're about to conclude this first panel. We are running really late, so I'm going to quickly go through the summary and the conclusions of this panel. I think it's important to see what Anna is doing, the new challenges that they're facing, not just in terms of water resources, but also basic sanitation. And that also is also a big reference entity in Latin America, and their principles with regards to access, also with regards to becoming more resilient. And I remember your 3 reflections. I like the green water, redefining the colors of water, make visible what's currently invisible. It's not just about groundwaters, like in the World Report, but everything related to the water footprint. And also this new financial architecture where water has a lot to say, and there's no doubt that that is our commitment. We always say, like, we say that water is at the core of sustainable development because we live that situation and we believe in that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Muchas gracias al moderador.
Thank you very much to the moderator and all the members of the panel for this enriching discussion where we've been able to listen firsthand to the different approaches that are being implemented in the Ibero-American region in order to move forward towards the sustainable development goals related to water. We'll now like to encourage you to continue with your conversation in a coffee break that will be reduced. It will last about 10 minutes. And we'll also like to ask you to come back on time in order to continue with the agenda. And also like to remind you that before you come back, you can pick up your simultaneous interpretation device, which will be quite useful in order to follow the next session, where one of our speakers will speak in English. Thank you very much.
Hola a todos, les agradecemos si pueden ir volviendo a sus asientos para continuar con el programa. Muchas gracias. Hola a todos, les agradecemos si pueden ir volviendo a sus asientos para continuar con el programa de estos diálogos del agua. Gracias. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas de nuevo.
Good morning. Sorry. Thank you and welcome again. Thank you for coming back after the coffee. Let me remind you that you can share feedback on the social media with the accounts CAF, IAGUA, and the hashtag Diálogos del Agua. After this small break, we're going to delve into the second session of today, focusing on the innovative financing mechanisms for water security. And for that, we'd like to welcome this next panel of experts that will delve into this topic. We'd like to invite the moderator, Concepcion Marcuello, Coordinator of International Water Affairs Support Unit in the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, and the members of the panel, Shantia Bradshaw, Vice Minister, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Transport, Works and Water Resources in Barbados, Pablo Pérez Artua, President of the Global Water Partnership, GWP, and Silvia Sarabia, expert on economic issues for water resources in TEPAL. Dear moderator, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you, Alejandro, and I'd like to welcome my dear members of the panel, with whom I love sharing this panel with Silvia, with Pablo, and the dear Minister. It is an honor. I'd like to start by asking on this panel on financing and innovation. I'd like to start by asking the excellent Deputy Prime Minister, you've highlighted the importance of water security in order to guarantee tourism, which is a key source of revenue for Barbados. And you highlight the renewed approach of sustainable tourism, as I said, focus on a set of strategies related to the water management, amongst those the preservation of water, the comprehensive management of water resources, and the development of infrastructure. And in this regard, I'd like to share with us which is the investment challenge in Barbados in order to meet these strategies, and which are the key restrictions and the potential key sources of financing that are expected in the country.
Much. It's a pleasure certainly to be here. Buenos dias and buenos tardes to the entire delegation and certainly to all listening online. Thank you for the question. First of all, Barbados is only 166 square miles. When I listen to all of the other panelists, it's clear that we're just a tiny island compared to the rest of you. We have a population of about 269,000 people, and we have been often described as punching above our weight. So while we do have a number of investment challenges, we have had to focus primarily in the last few decades on replacing our very old mains, water mains. They are over about 100 years old, and in many cases, it has presented numerous challenges as we try to build out the infrastructure of the country. Every time that we try to fix the mains, we end up completing one task, but then a few days later, there are bursts further down the pipeline as a result of the additional pressure that is taking place on the pipeline. We also have challenges in relation to investment, attracting sometimes the investors to be able to take the risk in Barbados, again, because it's small. We have been working very assiduously to try to reduce our debt, and we are doing a lot better than we were before. So we have tried to come up with a number of different innovative financing mechanisms which would be attractive to not only the banks, but also to private investors as well. In recent times, I think everyone is familiar with the conversation taking place at the level of the Honourable Prime Minister Mia Mottley on the global scene, speaking to new mechanisms of financing that are necessary for small developing states. We have been trying to get the rest of the world to appreciate that while we are not at the forefront of all of the emissions, we are certainly most vulnerable because we are small, because of where we're located. And the impact is great. We have been experiencing significant challenges in Barbados with climate change. We are seeing more intense levels of rainfall. As a consequence, we're seeing 3 to 4 inches of rain in very short periods, and that is having devastating effects in terms of our road infrastructure. It is also having devastating effects in terms of our physical infrastructure as well. We have therefore been pushing the Bridgetown Initiative, which is pretty much forcing the rest of the world to look at different forms of financing. I know that this will be a heavy topic at the upcoming COP conference. Prime Minister Motley and the Barbados team will be there. But it has forced us also to look at resilience planning, looking at across all ministries, not just water, what are the cost implications of being able to build out our economy? What are the things that our country needs in the various sectors, and in particular in water? And that can be from, means replacement to technical assistance to private-public sector partnerships, costing everything and then being able, with the plan, to be able to shop that within the international community. Because now that we are clear what it is that we need in order to, in a sense, reverse the hands of time, it is important that we're able to share that with the banks. It's important we're able to share that with investors and persons who may be interested in investing in Barbados as well.
Very interesting. Thank you, Minister. Ahora pasaré la palabra.
Now I'd like to give the floor to the Global Water Partnership, which is chaired by Mr. Beresiartua. This Global Water Partnership is a network of over 3,000 institutions and entities. This is a network that probably many of us are familiar with particularly with their English acronym, GWP. And this partnership is present in all continents, and there's no doubt that it's one of the institutions that has worked most and has developed concepts, instruments, and tools to promote the comprehensive management of the water resources. And based on this, I understand that the GWP is working a lot on the climate crisis as a water crisis. In this sense, and this is why I would like to ask you, which should be the roadmap from the economic aspects, the financial aspect, the political aspect, social partnership generation, in order to move forward and move forward better in this sustainable and comprehensive management of the resource in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much, Conchita. It is an honor for me to be here, particularly thanks to LAC and the two ministers, Transition and Economy. I'd also like to say that I am privileged to be a member of this panel, being the only man amongst three women. And I celebrate that, and also like to highlight it to the organizers who have designed it like this. The Global Water Partnership is in itself a global commodity. It is an organization of about 30 years of age, and we like to talk about it as an organization that represents the resource. It represents the water. What we've seen in recent years is that the water agenda has growth in importance. And what we can say moving forward is that we're convinced about this, and it's that it's going to become one of the key agendas, management agendas for governments, and also agendas for the development of investments, private investments in the coming years. GWP, within that context, faces a challenge, and it also has the possibility to participate, and that has something that has got to do with its identity. The concept developed by GWP from its origin is the comprehensive management of water resources. And if we look into what has been discussed today, we will see that we are behind the challenge of turning that concept practical and specific. And that is why in GWP, we currently talk about how we need to reach a 2.0 version of that concept. We all understand, as part of this partnership, that is present in over 180 countries with over 3,500 member organizations. We all understand the importance of that concept, but I also believe that we've all experienced the challenge of that concept turning into something operational, something real, and for it to become a finance vehicle, which is the topic of this panel. That is the 2.0 version of the comprehensive management of water resources. And I'd like to give a summary of 4 aspects that, in our opinion, are very important in order to rethink that comprehensive management as a new reality put into practice. The first one is about doing basic things well. I mean, the first thing that we need is for the basic concepts of water governance to be practically implemented. And from my experience, I have an example. Between 2015 and 2019, I was part of the Argentina cabinet in charge of these topics as a Secretary of State for Infrastructure and Water Policies. And there we had a utility called ISA, a public resources company called ISA with about 20,000 employees. ISA in 2015, December 2015, had 70% of subsidies as part of their operations. And we were capable in 2017, after hard work, to increase the rates. And an average was in May 2017 of 400%. That means in 5 levels represented a cross-subsidy between those that had higher payment capacity and those who didn't. In the highest quintile, the increase was of 2,000% in one go. Thanks to that, in the budget law in Argentina, because of that, Argentina was removed from the government, and it was removed from the national budget. And in January, 1 month later, allowed us to come to Europe. At the time, we came to London at the time, and we could issue debt without a government guarantee, without sovereign guarantee. Our goal at the time was to issue debt of $500 million. But when we concluded that, the day of the issuance, we had been offered at the same rate without sovereign guarantee $2.2 billion in order to conduct sanitation and water infrastructure in Argentina. That day, I had to call Mauricio Macri, the president of the country at the time, and I had to ask him whether we were to take $500 million or $2 billion. And the answer was, let's bring $500 million, which was our objective. I think it was the right answer. And if things go well, further later, we'll be able to do the same thing again. In practice, and without getting into details, I take this as an example to state that with the same institutions that we have, but managing them in an efficient fashion, in a transparent manner as well, we today have important opportunities to access genuine funding already existed in the market, like the example I'm giving you, which in this case, it was 4 times what had initially been expected. The second thing I'd like to state is that we are today at a breaking point with regards to climate change. Climate has its own agenda at a global level. So the definition of climate is how is water allocated in the planet. However, the fragmentation in the ecosystem leading with the water issues is such that that is not been, we've not been able to land that, if you want. We all know about the COPs. And we know that water is part of the discussion in the COP. So secondly, we have to talk about the funding opportunities linked to the water management and climate at the same time. And that's how I move on to the third item. And here I'd like to give you an example, the following example. We need to rethink the water governance. I'm going to give you another example that I am very familiar with. In the case of Latin America, which is what we're discussing here, there is an important basin, which is the Plata, or the Silver Basin, which is Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, and the Argentina. This is a good access is the Paraná River and the Uruguay River. What happens with that river now is that in the last 5 years, for the first time, due to the climate change, we have seen historical decreases, and that has been estimated in an impact of over $200 billion a year. This is the impact on the logistics. Think that for a country like Argentina, for example, or a Mediterranean country like Paraguay, which only exit is the hydro channel, this is important. We currently don't have a shared governance system for this system. And besides, part of the comprehensive vision is that we've seen how Brazil is growing in the grain production, which is the Mato Grosso. But currently, Brazil exports that grain growth to over 3,500 kilometers, particularly in Paraguay and Santos. Part of that load could go down a sailing path in Paraná with less than 20%, with more than 20% less cost. And that must be integrated into the comprehensive management of the water resources. And the third aspect that I wanted to highlight in order to rethink the financing is innovation related to new technologies, which some of them are no longer new, but they are in terms of the fact that we now use them correctly. And this is basically data and algorithms. On the one hand, we have artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things.
Porque el agua, y por eso festejo a la Comisión global que tenemos, que está replantando el valor económico del agua, el agua es un bien público o semipúblico, depende cómo lo veamos. Y la definición de un bien público o semipúblico es que el agua no se refleja el precio real del agua en los mercados de manera automática. Cuando vemos la relación entre oferta y demanda, nos quedan afuera las externalidades, las buenas y las malas. Los datos y la inteligencia artificial nos permiten un monitoreo que puede cuantificar las externalidades y que es el paso previo para el último punto que voy a mencionar, que es que podamos verdaderamente desarrollar nuevos mercados para financiar el agua. Cuando los mercados se desarrollan, por ejemplo, el agua que tenemos embotellada acá puede costar 1 euro, 2 euros o 3 euros el litro. Y ese es el valor con el cual pagamos 1 metro cúbico de agua que purificamos. Y es un valor muy superior al que le asignamos al impacto en la naturaleza o a los servicios que nos pueden dar la naturaleza para soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Entonces, el último punto que digo para la gestión integrada de los recursos hídricos 2.0 es que nosotros, habiendo recorrido esto, podemos plantear una gobernanza, y aquí voy a cerrar con GWP, que realmente integre las partes y que pueda, en los próximos años, materializar esos mercados, que son cuando hablamos del agua como un asset class nuevo, de lo que estamos hablando es de crear estos mercados, de que estén las garantías de que están los datos y de que estén los acuerdos de cómo se usan los datos para definir las externalidades y los precios. Eso solo va a generar incentivos porque el agua es definitivamente uno de los recursos transversales a nuestras economías. Entonces, GWP, para cerrar con la visión de GWP, yo creo que aporta varios aspectos a esto, pero 2 son centrales para mí. El primero es el que ya dije, que es que GWP puede aproximarse a esta agenda de una manera neutral. No tiene second agendas. No, GWP, esto no es algo que lo diga en detrimento de ninguna otra institución, pero no representa a las utilities, no representa a los gobiernos, no representa al financiamiento, es transversal, representa más bien al recurso. Y el segundo es que el aporte fundamental que puede hacer GWP en este desarrollo de los nuevos medios de financiamiento tiene que ver con plantear la gobernanza, reunir a las partes para que la visión y el abordaje sea integral. Voy a cerrar con un ejemplo último, que es que este año hicimos desde GWP un concurso mundial de startups. Se llamó Water Change Makers 2.0. Tuvimos más de 300 propuestas globales, elegimos 30. Y las estamos vinculando con fuentes, básicamente con fondos de inversión. Bueno, creo que ese tipo de catalizadores que encuentren las soluciones y las incluyan dentro de la gobernanza y el rol de una institución como GWP para poder, de una manera neutral y objetiva, reunir a las partes, es este aspecto de bien público global que GWP trae sobre la mesa.
Muchas gracias, Pablo. Muchas ideas sobre la mesa. Pasaré a mi querida Silvia Sarabia, como experta en asuntos económicos para los recursos hídricos de la CEPAL. Uno de los mecanismos de financiamiento que se viene discutiendo últimamente es el que se denomina financiamiento combinado y supone una financiación al desarrollo que puede apalancar o movilizar otros recursos, ya sean privados, comercial, banca pública. Con la brecha tan grande que tenemos para enfrentarnos a estos retos de cubrir, ¿no?, de alcanzar la seguridad hídrica y el ODS 6, ¿cómo podría contribuir o cómo se podría aprovechar mejor estas nuevas fuentes de financiamiento en el sector del agua y el saneamiento? ¿Cómo se podría avanzar en estas fuentes innovadoras de las que ya pues nos ha dado ejemplos también GWP?
Muchas gracias, Conchita, y realmente muchas gracias por invitar a la CEPAL. Realmente, como funcionaria de Naciones Unidas, estar en un panel como este que prioriza que alcancemos y busquemos formas para llegar a...
The way we can actually reach and achieve those challenges. I would like to underscore something which is important, and it has to do with the financial context for the sector in the region. And this has to do with something that was underscored by the minister before. And this is that if we see in CEPAL, we're calculating that the requirements, GDP-wise, in order to close the gap, what we heard was 0.5%. Well, we're a little bit more ambitious. We're saying 1.3% because we've included the expenses that must be made because the current infrastructures are not in a good condition. We haven't cared for them. So we need to think about 0.16%. We need to multiply by 3 to 8 times. And what is the variability that that will actually represent in a country such as Honduras? In our case, we calculated that 4% of our GDP yearly times 10 years close the gap. But that's not all. We need to think about resources that are not refundable. It's impossible. So this is the idea. This is what we've been talking about. We've been talking about this at length. And we also know, and we've mentioned this, that there is a concern. The private sector is thinking about penetrating this sector because there's many parties involved, because there are weaknesses that have to do with management and so on. And as Pablo said, it's difficult to collect. Will the amounts cover real costs of operation? So more risk. We need to think about the transaction costs, which are very high. So also recovery times, turnaround times, 30 years, but we have a 10-year maturity date. So it's very difficult to ensure that marriage of public and private. So what do we see from CEPAL? Yes, and we're looking at joint funding. Well, nothing that is very striking, but it does call for a lot of governance. So investment funds, revolving ones. In the U.S., this is the tool, this is the instrument that over the past 30 years has encouraged investments in water. You have seed capital, which allows for a long time with interesting interest rates. At CEPAL, we have tracked the Filipino alternative, public funds, Japanese cooperation, U.S. cooperation funds, a national bank that helps to manage, that helps to reduce the asymmetry of information, and that provides technical assistance to ensure that those projects are underway, as Angel described before in his address, and which ensure the match between supply and demand. But what happens? Well, that's done. Why isn't it done in Latin America? In CEPAL, we see 3 obstacles. First, we need more of a payment culture. We know that it's difficult because of the inequalities which are characteristic of us. In CEPAL, we examined 16 surveys, and family expenditures, average, water and sanitation, is 0.8% at most. And the tariffs are very regressive. The poorest quintiles pay proportionally twice what the quintile which is best off. So our work is cut out for us. In global terms, we say that households should be spending on water and sanitation between 3 and 5% of our expenses. But it's much more than that. Sometimes we think that water is a God-given right, which is not to say that I should receive this free of charge, because if you have a right to something, I have a responsibility. I need to return it in a clean format. If I want my children, if I want my grandchildren to have access to clean water, I'm accountable for that. Then there's another obstacle, which is going from political management of these resources, which are not refundable, which are limited, which are not available in all municipalities, to a more technical approach where you are going to defend your project. And finally, we need to also consider that solidarity is important. We know that there are going to be some groups that are not going to have access to credit because they don't have access to that. But a well-managed fund can not only grow as the service is provided, but furthermore, it can be solidary. So there, we need to think about what we can do. We know that we have the financial expertise and that cultural change, which we have right now in Latin America, our culture and transparency with regards everything that has to do with water. What I'm saying here is important. I know it's difficult, but an initial step must be taken. Thank you very much. Yes, we're talking about striking a balance. I think that you all have agreed on the fact that it's important to attract investors with an interesting portfolio. This calls for governance and looking for the right role to be performed by the different interested parties. We know that that's important. And we need to identify the different challenges, as we heard in the case of small islands, for instance. That's an additional complication. Coastal areas, and the fact that there are those needs that are specific to current infrastructure and to past infrastructures. We have time for questions. I like this coming and going. We talk about governance, we talk about different mechanisms for funding purposes. I have to acknowledge that I feel more comfortable talking about governance and about comprehensive management of water resources, but I need to underscore the importance when we talk about this. I think it's important to talk about finding solutions. So, for instance, why not make rivers navigable, even if they cross from one country to another? Or why not use unconventional resources within that sum total of resources, encouraging and fostering and openly acknowledging that we need to desalt, that we need to reuse, that we need to store, and take into account that protection which must be guaranteed to the environment. I would like then to ask, as a Minister of Transport, Works and Water Resources, I would like to ask you, Madam Minister, do you face this challenge of water conservation? You are a small island, so do you also have to deal with climate change? And especially, more specifically, when we see floods, when we see potential droughts, and along these lines, I would ask, what plans do you have? What are your roadmaps, if you will? What are the investments necessary that go hand in hand with those plans? And, well, in a nutshell, do you have innovative mechanisms in mind? Social, institutional, financial? You talked a little bit about that at first, but now we're focusing on the impact, specifically of climate change. So my question is, what would those challenges be? Thank you, ma'am.
Out of the last few hurricanes that have devastated the Caribbean, it has really been a wake-up call for a lot of Caribbean leaders and Caribbean governments. I think the last one that was of major significance was Maria, and it forced us into a position where we had to look at planning for disaster, not just before, but also how we recover after a disaster. It has meant that across the various ministries, and obviously I have responsibility for one that is responsible for water as well as drainage and also roads. One of the things that we've had to look at is preparation and operational procedures to ensure that we prepare before, but also that we are able to clear roads and to do all of the preparations thereafter. Because of the intensity of the weather, what is happening is that we are having areas flooding that traditionally would not have flooded. Excuse me. And it is creating, obviously, significant challenges for the country. We have therefore looked at, pardon me. Yes. Sorry about that. Apologize. Right. We've had to look at ensuring that we prepare resiliency plans. We've had to look at engineers who can assist us in planning for disaster. one of the discussions with CAF, even today, has been about, improving technical capacity, being able to partner and to network with institutions, companies, entities, governments, and lending institutions that are able to assist us in being able to plan effectively. So a lot of our focus, whether it's in relation to droughts or floods, generally has been focused on partnering with persons and companies that can assist us with the technical capacity. We simply don't have the luxury of time. So it means that, just a few months ago, I was in the Netherlands because we were looking at best practices. And we led a team with the Barbados Water Authority to be able to see how are they managing with the droughts and also how are they dealing with the issues of flooding. I was there at a time when they experienced the first hurricane in decades in the summer. So for me, climate change is very real. And therefore, it means that as we experience, even in Barbados, we've had, significant major events, Hurricane Elsa recently, which again devastated a number of households. We're still recovering 3 years later from that. And therefore, it has meant that we've had to plan effectively in terms of how do we deal with these types of disasters for the future as well. I think looking forward, what we would want to see in terms of our relationship, certainly with CAF and other institutions, is assessments of the models that we have. We're in the process of rolling out a new legislation in relation to stormwater management. For many years, Barbados had flood prevention legislation, and just by its name, it implies that, again, we were not thinking ahead in terms of how we manage water. So the focus is now on stormwater management, and again, the technical capacity, the legal expertise in terms of how we plan, but also how we improve our human resource capacity to be able to handle the implementation of a lot of the measures that are going to be necessary is important for Barbados. We've also had to look at things like debt for nature swaps, as well as, in many cases, looking at debt for climate swaps as well. Those are recent initiatives and innovations that Barbados has been leading the charge on. Again, trying to ensure that we place ourselves in a position where the rest of the world understands that, we are small, and therefore we are reliant on the assistance at times to be able to build out our capacity to allow us to, in a sense, have a fighting chance. It is very scary for, I think, the islands, and in particular for Barbados, when we see the impacts of flooding, especially in vulnerable communities. We have to invest heavily in equipment and machinery, to be able to get the water pumped off. Otherwise, we've lost lives before in the country, and this is not uncommon in the region. So we have to really be more proactive in being able to take initiatives that would allow us to reduce the loss of lives, but also the displacement of communities. We've also had a look at flood mapping, so that we can, again, identify where the areas in the event of major disasters are likely to be flood prone. Now, the challenge for a country that has most of its, is surrounded by water rather, is that almost every area is flood prone. There are only 2 parishes in Barbados that are not surrounded by water. So I think you can appreciate the challenges that we all face when we hear that there's a system heading towards our shores, because while in some cases we have never seen the level of devastation as other countries have seen, equally we are impacted now by heavy flooding and a lot of rain and intense rain for very long periods. So it is making Barbados, I think, be at the forefront of trying to find the necessary financing to make improvements quickly. Our drainage systems are in need of dire improvement because they were built for less intense weather. But now, as we build out our roads, we're having to not only replace water mains, because it doesn't make any sense leaving the water mains in place, we have to build out the water mains as well. But it also means building our roads where the drainage infrastructure is also vastly improved as well. Now, all of these things come with a cost. And we may speak about water, but equally, it has a direct impact on all of the other areas if you are to really see the significant improvements that are necessary. In speaking to the team at CAF this morning, I was mentioning to them that while we speak of water, what we are seeing is a devastating effect on our roads as a result of the water, the heavy rainfall as well. And that is impacting even for Barbados, its own financing mechanisms in relation to road infrastructure. So it is important that the rest of the world understand that it's not just a conversation about water alone, but it's drainage, it's road infrastructure, it is the vulnerability of households, it's the vulnerability of small islands, and the inability of many of these countries to have the financing mechanisms to readily be able to put the measures in place to build out the infrastructure quickly. We've benefited a lot from this trip, and I'm really grateful to CAF for that, the invitation to be here. As a policymaker, it pleases me that I think we can see in Barbados that we are doing the right things, but we may need now to accelerate some of the relationships with other countries and other partners to be able to help us to get over the initial hurdles. But I think we're on the right track. And we do welcome the support from CAF. I'm pleased as well that CAF is, Barbados has now been welcomed onto the board of CAF. I think that is significant for the region, and whether it's in relation to drought management or water management, I think this will set a very serious precedent for the rest of the Caribbean region, and certainly for Latin America as we, in a sense, battle these issues together going forward. So I'm very happy to be here and to share the experiences with you in Barbados and the innovative mechanisms that we've been using to overcome the challenges of climate change.
Okay, I think this is just, it has been just a good start. So let's see. I'm sure that there will be a continuation probably with helping the Caribbean countries, because we all, Latin American, Caribbean sometimes are parts of the same space. So going to GWP now in this second question. I'm sorry, perdón. Yendo a...
Yes, so I switch into Spanish, yes. So, yes, we're talking now about GWP for our second question. We do have a little bit of time. So when we talk about these sources, these innovative sources of funding, I have to say that this is a complicated question, very difficult to formulate, but I'm sure GWP has an answer which will clarify the concept. The Alliance has striven to identify new sources in different parts of the world, right? You have a presence the world over. So you're looking at different sources of funding in order to lessen the gap, to gain efficiency, to ensure that the different governments do their utmost to raise funds from multilateral entities and from private entities, attracting funds, reaching out to third parties, private-public partnerships, as discussed with CEPAL. So let me ask, your experience at GWP, what would you say happens in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean? What are the necessary preconditions to ensure that this is actually possible? Well, thank you for the question. Let me give you a little bit of background information. I've traveled the world. I've been to places I didn't know, in Asia, for instance. And what I've seen is that this is a common challenge. And there are different good practices that we can learn from. And I think that part of the value of the network is that we can identify these good practices and make them available to everyone. Some of them now are at a relatively low scale, and they can scale up and they can be more important. GWP is important because we have access to important information. When I visited Japan this year, I was received by no less a personality than the emperor. He's very interested in water-related issues. He ratified the commitment of the country of Japan, the desire to participate. They have a number of initiatives, making them available so that we can actually replicate them. But I don't have much time, so I'm going to focus on one of the programs that we have underway, which is especially valuable for GWP, the African Investment Program. We've been working at an African scale. We have 5 seats in Africa. We lead the program from Pretoria, and this program was publicized in March in New York at the most recent UN General Assembly. The implementation of the program was launched, and there's going to be now a number of very important events at the COP. And GWP has made good on its role, as I discussed before. It has reached out to over 15 presidents from African countries. A high-level panel for the African Investment Program has been put together, and a number of leaders from other continents, some prime ministers from the Netherlands, for instance, also members of the high-level panel. And on the basis of this political leadership and within the framework of this leadership, an initiative is being carried out which addresses mobilizing what we believe should be $30 billion per year invested in water in Africa. The gap is larger. In our studies, we assess that the impact of lack of water and sanitation, the lack of a holistic approach in Africa, is of approximately $200 billion a year. This affects vulnerable peoples, it affects the economies, local and national, but our target is 30. So I would ask all of you to visit the website, and there you will see a detailed explanation of what I'm explaining now. But you're going to see there's a pyramid of resources. The base of those dollars, we believe there's some 11 billion, between 11 and 12 billion dollars, which should come to the surface after achieving good practices. This is essential. Onboarding technologies, this is essential. Onboarding governance models, availing themselves of the same investments which will truly have an impact. Resources will be used thinking about the aims in mind, and the costs in the value chain will be audited and will be real. So let's think 1/3, that's the bottom of the pyramid. Then there's a middle tranche, and this has to do with what Maria Fernanda from the Global Commission said. We believe between 15 and 17 billion every year in Africa should result from the valuation of water in productive sectors, so mining, so food, so energy, and other areas as well. In our report, we launch a proposal which is how to use an assessment at a sectorial level that would represent the use of water by those sectors that represents a contribution to closing the gap. That's between 15 and 17 billion dollars. And the top of the pyramid is the more innovative portion. When we return to the asset class idea, we should put to the test in Africa and elsewhere too, why not, how to create these new markets, data-based, models-based, that will truly be profitable. So when we think of Latin America, for instance, why not think about, well, the African Investment Program for Africa? Why not think about an investment program for Latin America? One that would be coordinated by an entity with a series of institutions, not one necessarily, with this idea of monitoring the pyramid of resources and ensuring that we generate these best practices at the bottom of the pyramid, new policies in the central tranche, and innovations at the tip. So this is a challenge. This is my gauntlet for Latin America. Look at the program that GWP has in Africa and think about whether this is a possible approach, a possible way to harness these initiatives. And finally now, I'd like to say that in Latin America, and everywhere actually, but Latin America especially, we have to reassess these 3 elements, because what we are seeing now is that we're going to have to invest as we have not invested. So dams, for instance, we have a GWP study that says that a clear response to variability has to do with storage, and countries in Latin America are going to have to think about large, medium-sized, and small dams. And within the current context, this is going to call for a degree of governance which is going to be more than what we have now, in terms of approval, basins, in terms of funding schemes, in terms of profits and benefits and advantages. Before the panel, there was a conversation. The Madam Ambassador from Bolivia was with us. Bolivia is actually contemplating at least 7 new dams, and this is a scheme which the CAF is studying right now. The same would be valid for other countries. Of course, it's not alone. It's not a single case. In a continent such as ours, there are very, very important gaps in terms of infrastructure. Current standards to approve them, define them, and manage them also represent a gap. It's not only the initial investment, it's also knowledge, it's credibility, and also it is ensuring that one can actually flesh out the commitments which are initially put down on paper.
Muy interesante.
This is a very interesting reflection. It actually reminds me of the importance of all the stakeholders and all the partnerships that can be generated in order to build these pyramids, right? These pyramids in different parts of the world, and with regards to resilience to droughts in Spain, together with Senegal, we are actually currently promoting and leading the International Resilience Partnership in relation to drought. And this is also based on these principles. It's about preparedness to drought, looking for solutions to capacity building, technology, looking for financing mechanisms. I think these are ways of building. And now I link it to the last question. Spain is also part of the network of Ibero-American water directors, which is the CODIA. And we have recently held the annual meeting. It was about 15 days ago in the Havana in Cuba. And we've been working a lot on this, on closing these gaps in a project focusing on how to improve our public policies in order to meet the SDG 6. And it's been decided, thanks to a cooperation with CAF, between Spain and CAF. We have discussed a lot on treatment and sanitation. And one of the agreements that have been achieved is about building a financing group that has been a request of these water directors. The idea is to work and address in an orderly manner, in a technical manner, all the types of challenges. And so I think we have elements, and what we need is to turn these issues into concepts. And I think this has to come from the highest management levels in order to generate this political urge. And now moving on to Sylvia. We have a couple of minutes left, but I'm sure you'll be able to explain it all wonderfully with regards to the challenges the challenges that relate governance and financing. And that's why I like to talk about the regional water dialogues in Latin America and the Caribbean. This was held last month of February. The CEPAL launched a project on regional observatory on water sustainability, and all countries have actually been presenting in these regional dialogues their priorities on the needs of technical assistance based on the proposal of sustainable water transition proposed by the CEPAL. And, based on the, all the stakeholders that are working together to make progress towards a sustainable access to water. What steps have you taken in order to consolidate this observatory? And how do you believe the CODIA, like other initiatives, can contribute to promoting this observatory, this pink observatory, as you call it, and how other multilateral entities can collaborate, for example, at the CAF? Well, thank you very much. It is an excellent question because it is exactly a week ago when Antonio Guterres was in the key room of the CEPOL. And if I can summarize his key messages, that the regional commissions must become a meeting space, a space to create synergies and bring our work agenda on the SDGs through involving as many stakeholders as possible in our respective regions. The idea of this pink project, if you want, the pink observatory, is precisely that, is to reach the needs of the region, starting with the founding countries, but we want to address them from a collaborative point of view. That is why the pink goes together with the regional group of experts on water resources. The Rosa, really. That's why I'm really happy that we are part of the global partnership is there. The global water partnership is there, and a lot of other entities from the region, whether they are in the UN, outside of the UN, in the academia sector, and so on. And our idea is to open the doors to the best experts, to share the agendas. We already had an excellent opportunity with the CODIA this year. They were given a course on sanitation in the Rosa. It was a topic that the countries had asked us to do, and we could join efforts so that in one single platform we could put together all the audiences, and so that we avoid repetition amongst ourselves. The idea also is to have a unified message. It is true that we have our peculiarities, but ultimately we all want water sustainability. We all want to meet the SDG 6. So the Rosa is a network above everything. The observatory is an instrument to upload all the information that everybody's using, the Andes communities, the set the gas with the data, the groundwaters, everything, basically any new study will be incorporated into this observatory so that this become an information point for all the stakeholders of the region. So if anybody wants, there's what is happening, who's doing what door should I knock on, who's working on circular economy, and so on, can access that. It should be an exchange network, and the Rosa is an element of the network. And what is done, we've done a lot this year, is a lot of technical assistance, and we work on circular economy. We want the treatment plants to become more circular, and that is where we're calling upon everyone to recover methane, for example, at small scales, in order to have bankable projects with very appealing paybacks. And I go back to my previous topic. It is difficult for funding to reach the different regions. And here we are responding to the question with the CAF. Where we would like to work? We would like to work on those financing models together, thinking about the realities of the individual countries, because we cannot do a copy-paste here. It is impossible. So we have to carry out that work hand in hand with finance experts. And in CEPAL, you know that we are an institution that works on more inclusive public policies, more sustainable public policies, with a high impact on production, like our new executive secretary is saying, Mr. José Manuel Salazar Serenach. So I see a lot of opportunities for collaboration. The CEPAL is always open to all, and I'd like to take this opportunity to announce you that next year, we hope in the next edition of the Regional Water Dialogues, we will participate, and the CEPAL will have the role of compiling the regional report of the positioning for the International Water Forum in Indonesia. So it is our turn to create this space where we are going to put together all our priorities, but mainly we're going to put together our commitments. So let's hope that you can be in some of our panels. I'd like to invite you all to take part of these celebrations. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And I think that is been the responses have been perfectly clear. I think now we're running out of time, so I'd like to say thank you very much for your contributions. And like I said before, this is not just it's basically a new space for discussion. We will continue with these discussions in future events. And without further ado, I conclude this panel. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, and thank you also to all the members of the panel for sharing their vision on this innovative tools that could articulate the necessary funding to reach water security.
For highlighting Barbados' strategies in using CAF membership to improve water and sanitation. Your focus on financing, capacity building, and knowledge exchange is truly inspiring for sustainable water management. Y ahora, tras estas enriquecedoras.
And now, after these enriching sessions that we have enjoyed, it is time to close this event. And if I may, I would like to quickly summarize the most important keynote messages. The opening by Mr. Hugo Morán, Secretary of State of Environment, highlighted the importance of the partnership between Spain, Latin America, and the Caribbean, highlighting the need of innovative investments and digitalization in managing water resources. Christian Astinelli from the CAF highlighted how emergent it is to close the financing gaps in the water sector, highlighting the need of significant annual investment up to 2030 in order to guarantee water security. Gonzalo García Andrés, Secretary of State of Economy, highlighted the value of international collaboration and the importance of effective public policies. Ángel Cárdenas by CAF highlighted the need to mobilize quality investments on water and climate resilience. Then the Director General of Water in Spain, Teodoro Estrella, talked about the financial challenges associated to the third cycle water plans, focused particularly on water security and sanitation. The panel on a 2030 agenda, moderated by Franz Rojas Ortuste, delved into the commitments acquired in the UN Assembly in New York, with them focusing on the international cooperation to address water challenges. The OECD highlighted the water crisis, urging for an investment that promotes governance and regional cooperation for the efficient management of water. Ana Carolina Argolo from ANA presented the Brazil plans for a 5.2 billion euro investments in water infrastructure, also highlighting the importance of public and private partnerships. Rubén Alemán from ANDA highlighted the importance of water for the national development, announcing important investments from multilateral organisms and highlighting the importance of transparency in order to meet the SDGs, particularly in the real world. The second panel, led by Concepción Marcuello, addressed the topic of innovative financing for water security. Santiago Bracho from Barbados highlighted the importance of investment to fight against climate change and the efforts to attract private financing. Pari Alvarez Artua from GWP highlighted the importance of water governance and the integration of water and climate management, together with the use of new technologies and data. Finally, Silvia Sarabia from CEPAL highlighted that the needs on water infrastructure are higher than expected, and she highlighted the reluctances of the private sector due to the risks perceived, suggesting investment funds as a potential solution, but realizing important challenges in the assessment of water. This 9th edition of Water Dialogues has therefore been an exceptional platform for sharing knowledge and experiences, setting out a clear road towards a more sustainable future in water management. We'd like to say goodbye with valuable solutions, but also with a strong commitment to continue working together in meeting our common goals. As representative of CAF, I would like to thank all of those who have been with us in situ here in Madrid, and all the dear friends that have followed us through streaming and that followed this 9th edition of Water Dialogues for Spain and Latin America and the Caribbean. We'll thank the ministries in Spain for financial affairs and ecological transition for their support, and thank you also to our media partner iAgua. And we remind you that if you have missed any part of this event, you can access the microsite of Sitios del Agua in the CAF website, caf.com, or in the YouTube channel of the Development Bank for Latin America. We will also like to offer you to enjoy the best moments in the social media of CAF, where we have shared exclusive content of this session. Once again, thank you everyone for your participation and attention. We would like to wish you a wonderful evening.